You mean business?
Yeah. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is 5 o'clock. And Kate, sorry, it's okay. Would you please do the roll call?
Yes. Stu Boyd.
Here.
Amy Doran.
Here.
Don Kirk.
Here.
Barbara Cruz.
Here.
Pam Howard.
Here.
Anna Alexandra Wesson.
Here.
Nancy Rumpel.
Here.
Thank you. And Stu, would you lead us in the pledge, please, while we all have our mouths full?
And I'll start immediately. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Stu. All right, we are going to go for the approval of our agenda for tonight. So are there any changes or corrections to the agenda for tonight's meeting? Hearing none, I'll take a motion to adopt the agenda as printed.
So moved.
Second.
We had a motion from Dawn and a second from Stu and Pam together. It's pretty much a tie.
We'll give her a second.
A quarter second.
That's right. So Kay, would you call the roll?
Okay, Stu Boyd.
You got me. Aye.
Amy Doran.
Aye.
Don Kirk.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Alexandra Wesson.
Aye.
Nancy Rumpel.
Aye.
Thank you, Kate. Okay, we're moving into the discussion items for our upcoming board meeting, which will be June 21. And these are questions that we will have an opportunity. We've studied, had a few days to look them over. We will ask questions like we've been doing, just kind of a round robin. And I'll try real hard to stay on task so I know who's first for the next time around. And we'll do a couple rounds and see how the questions are kind of dwindling, and then have a board decision as to whether we're going to keep it until we've answered all of them, or ask that the rest of them be submitted in writing to the cabinet member that needs to answer those. So we'll start with our Head Start grant, and it's Amy instead of Matt today. So welcome, Amy.
Good evening, Madam President, Board of Education members, and Dr. Schaefer. Tonight, Chief Academic Officer Melissa Schneider. Tonight, we present to you the Head Start grant, which is an annual thing that you're probably come used to hearing. And you've also been hearing some parts of that Head Start grant coming along the way here in the past couple of months. But tonight we have Amy Gerhardt, who is our Administrator of Early Childhood, who is stepping in to talk you through the grant, and I will just go ahead and hand it right over to her.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Schaefer. Thank you for allowing me to be here in Liam's absence. So this evening I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the continuation grant application. As you know, the Head Start grant is a 5-year process, and the continuation grant is something that we have to do each year, and we just update parts of it, and then every 5 years we write the whole grant. So we are in year 3, so we are on a continuation grant cycle this year. So this work connects to our District Strive 2025 goals in these areas. Under student achievement, through continuous monitoring and focus on readiness goals, in the preschool setting, students will be set up for success in their journey towards graduation and beyond. Focus Area 2, inclusive and supportive culture. Our readiness goals focus on language, literacy, math, social, emotional skills for each student, which are critical for student success. In the area of human talent, recruitment, training, and retention of qualified staff is a priority as we support student learning. And then under stewardship of resources, allocation of resources is carefully aligned with program goals and is shared with all stakeholders. So in the continuation grant, we update sections of the grant that have changed. Not every section is going to change each year, but we base all of those changes on data that we collect. So each year we do a self-assessment that starts in November and is completed in April. In that self-assessment, we look at all areas of our program, We invite parents, community members, and staff to participate in that self-assessment. We also conduct a community needs assessment, and then, of course, look at our student data. So all of those data sources are what make us make changes to the grant. Otherwise, we wouldn't make changes. So we have to look at all of those sources of data before we make any changes. So under the grant, in subsection A is the goals, and our overarching program goal is to provide every child in our community with an exemplary early childhood education. That's our big, hairy, audacious goal, according to LAM. It's our BHAG. And then under that, we have program goals. So our first goal is around student attendance. Certainly, we want every student to be there 100% of the time. But we have aligned this goal to be congruent with what Head Start requires, which is 85%. We also look to improve our parent involvement each year. This year we're super excited because we were able to have in-person events finally. People were able to volunteer in classrooms finally, so we did see a big increase in parent involvement. And then finally, of course, we want to prepare students and families for kindergarten and beyond. And all of our goals are based on, obviously, the state standards, but also Head Start provides us with some early learning outcomes that we are also required to follow. And so they align with our state standards nicely, so that works out. But there's the link there for you if you are interested in exploring that further. So the area that changes yearly is our school readiness goals, and that is because we base that basically on what the students perform, how they perform. And so you will see that each of these goals is written in the same format. What changes is the percentage in the area. And also, we look at how students are performing within widely held expectations. As you know, preschoolers, there's a range of development for preschoolers, right? So the benchmark is a range. It's not they need to get an A, it's this range. And these widely held expectations are research-based, and they're laid out for us through teaching strategies, which provides us our curriculum and our assessment in early childhood. So this year we were hoping for 88% of our 4-year-olds to be within or above widely held expectations in the area of social emotional development, and 86% of them reached that. So almost made it, but not quite. Okay, keep going. In literacy, we were hoping for 90% of 4-year-olds to be within or above widely held expectations, and a big celebration, 91%. So we attribute some of that to be the fact that the district included us in the science of reading training. So our teachers' skill level, I think, was brought up. Their understanding of what they should be teaching and how they should be teaching in literacy also improved, so yay. Under language, as you know, a lot of times preschoolers don't have a lot of language. So that's a big area that we focus on. Communication, as we know, is a very important skill for all children to have, and all adults for that matter. So we were shooting for 90% of 4-year-olds and 86% of the children who are 4 actually were within or above widely held expectations. And finally, in the area of mathematics, we were shooting for 86% of 4-year-olds to be within or above widely held expectations, and 83% of our students were within or above. So when we look at that data, that tells us we're a little bit lower in math, and so we will be providing, along with the district, we are going to provide some training for our teachers in math instruction. It won't be the same as the districts, but it will be more aligned with what early childhood would expect, and so that will happen in the fall as well. So our school readiness objectives for next year. We had a group of our leadership team, and then it went to staff, and then of course last night we presented to Policy Council, which is our group of parents. They look at student data, they look at the 3-year-old data, they look at trends, and they look at kind of what is coming. So we know universal preschool is coming. We're going to have a lot more 4-year-olds joining our program that probably would not have qualified for our program, and so we don't kind of know what that's going to look like. So we did our best to set these goals based on all that information. So in the area of social emotional development, we're hoping for 88% of our 4-year-olds to be within or above widely held expectations. In the area of school readiness and literacy, we're going to keep that at 90%. In the area of language, 87%. And in the area of mathematics, 85%. The next area in the grant is service area, subsection B. So all of these things are included in that. There was only one small change in anything in this area, and that is our centers and facilities. As we know, we're closing Monroe, but we're opening Peakview. So those students will not be at Monroe, they'll be at Peakview. So the center will change, not the students. And then we closed Centennial and Coyote Ridge this year because of low enrollment, and with the anticipation of higher enrollments next year because of UPK, we're reopening those 2 centers. So tiny change, not a big one. Subsection C is around government, human resource management, program management, quality improvement. We don't anticipate any changes in those areas for the next grant cycle. Any questions?
Any questions?
My question was answered.
I do have a question for you. When I read through the information, it didn't occur to me, and so I apologize. If it had occurred to me, I would have sent you the question, and therefore, if you're not able to answer it, that's all right. Do you happen to know how the student performance in the various areas that you went through now compares with pre-pandemic numbers?
We do. I don't have that information in my head, but we've been collecting data on this since 2010. So we have data that goes back to 2010 that we look at each year. So when they created these goals, our leadership team looked at the last 3 to 4 years. I will tell you that this year we did see a big deficit in all areas in preschoolers coming in. We saw amazing growth, and they ended up kind of where we would have expected them to end up. So that was a big celebration for teachers, parents, families, kids, and all the hard work that they put in.
Yeah.
We had several families that approached teachers day one and said, my child has not been outside my house. We didn't go to McDonald's Playland. We didn't go to the park. We didn't have play dates with the neighbors because of the pandemic, because families were afraid, for those kinds of things. So children didn't have that exposure that typical kids in typical years would have had. So we were excited for the growth, but it was a rough start, I would say.
I don't need to see the numbers. You don't
Okay.
need to send them to me. I was just
Sure.
curious for some anecdotal evidence, and you provided that, so thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Questions?
I thought you said you didn't have any.
Actually, it's not really a question, it's more, I was just really excited reading this, seeing the numbers of 88%, 90%, 91%. So actually, I guess my question would be, it seems like we're able to, the Head Start preschool level, get kids really engaged and excited about learning. And then, as they progress, something happens. So to me, and I don't know if you guys probably have, but given thought to like really trying to deconstruct, what are you doing that gets them so engaged, so excited, so that you get 91% literacy, but then by the time we get to 3rd grade, the reading proficiency, it drops. And so I don't know if it's a question of, because the class size is so small, or there's so many more people in the classroom with the kids, and that if there was a way to carry that up through 3rd grade to really cement it. I mean, that's my question, observation, but great job.
Thank you. I don't know if I can answer that.
I would actually
but-
call on Sarah, who is here to support. Sarah Rasmussen is our Executive Director of Elementary and Early Childhood. Sarah, would you mind talking about like the EC through 12 philosophy piece that we have going or starting?
Yes. So hi everyone. So we are starting to do, and this is not a new thing. We started this previously in our district, and really the follow through didn't happen. So we're reigniting the PK3 model. And so we have a task force that's kind of come together, and we have representation. Actually, Lesla's on that. Amy will be a part of that, Lamb, myself, and then we have some principals who are interested in that work as well. But that's exactly what we're hoping to address. We really want to see what that continuum can look like, because as you said, we have some really great practices in our early childhood programs as well as our kindergarten programs, and how can we replicate those so that we continue that joy and love of learning and reading and growing through all grade levels, but especially those formative years through third grade, so that when kids leave third grade, they're still excited about learning, they're good readers, they're excited about math. Like, we just want to continue that work. So the task force met a couple weeks ago just for some initial conversation, and then we will start that work this coming school year.
That's great. I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any other questions, board members?
I have a question. Just, is the data, is that just Head Start kids, or is that all the preschoolers?
That's program-wide data.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wasn't sure. Thank you.
Anybody else?
My question was answered during the presentation, so thanks.
How many full-day programs are there, or were there this year?
This year we had 6.
And will there be 6 again next
There
year?
will be 7 next year, so
At-
thank you for getting that.
Yeah, which site is having it?
So this year it was at Monroe and Stansberry. So next year will be Peakview and Stansberry, and then we'll add Edmondson.
Okay,
At where?
Edmondson is going to be.
Edmondson will be the
Okay,
other full day.
that's what I was curious. Okay, anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Very thorough. All right, 3.2 on our agenda is the notice of designated election official and approval of district participation in the 2023, that sounds strange, coordinated election. And I believe that I'm turning it over to you.
Yep. So good evening, board members. Biannually, there is a coordinated election, school board election here in the Thompson School District. And we have the opportunity and duty to elect what's called a DEO, or a designated election official. And this is a person who coordinates with the 3 counties. We actually serve 3 counties here, Larimer, Weld, and Boulder, to help coordinate the election. So it's really twofold. One, it would be to appoint Laura Lee Ehlers, who is our Board of Education Secretary, to serve as that designated election official. And it is also to declare the district's intent to participate in the November election. There are 4 seats that are up, and those are in areas A, C, D, and G. And so those 4 seats will be up. And so the board will be asked to formally vote on that during your June 21st meeting. This is something that we do biannually. In the history of the district, we've always had, I believe, the board secretary serve as the designated election official, certainly during my tenure here. And I stand open for any questions.
Okay. Nancy, we'll go around this again now. No? Questions? Anybody? Okay.
I take all the easy presentations.
Yeah.
That's when we should be breathing air. You know, so.
Nice job.
Yeah.
Well done, A+. Okay, 3.3. This is a new policy that we're going to be looking at. It's the first reading of JLCDC, medically necessary treatment in school settings. And Laszlo is here. Yes, okay.
Thank you, Madam President. Tonight, Laszlo Hunt, who is our Director of Special Education, will be presenting an update to policy, which you've been given the red line version and some of the revisions on. Maybe you've had some time to take a look at that. But he will be going over some of those changes and take your questions about it. So I'll turn it right over to him.
Evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Schaefer. Tonight I'm presenting a new policy for that will be returning for your approval. Policy JLC-DC and as well as JLC-DC-R. This is authorizing private healthcare specialists to provide medical treatment in school settings. So a little bit of background. This originated in House Bill 22-1260, which was passed last year, last spring I think it was. And it's in accordance with Colorado Revised Statute 2220-121-2A. And what it states in that is that no later than July 1, 2023, each administrative unit shall adopt a policy that addresses how a student who has a prescription from a qualified healthcare provider for medically necessary treatment receives such treatment in the school setting as required by applicable state and federal laws. Just by way of clarity, if you're not aware, AU refers to administrative unit, and that's how within special education and gifted education in the state of Colorado, we refer to AUs. That's how it's divided as opposed to districts. So we are both an AU and a district, but there are many places where districts live within, like in the BoCEs, several districts will be within one AU. So that's that language if you see that come up. This policy does the following, so just kind of outlining what it does. It will define the term of medical necessary treatment. It constitutes what a private health care specialist is. Provides IEP and 504 teams guidance and decision-making surrounding the need for medically necessary treatment in the school setting, including the need for applied behavioral analysis or ABA therapy. It outlines how services will be permitted in the school setting in order to minimize the impact on the learning environment. It outlines an appeal process for disagreements over the need for this treatment at school. And finally lists the requirements that must be in place for an authorized private healthcare specialist to provide medically necessary treatment in the school setting. Short and sweet.
Yeah. So I have a question for, maybe it's, and it just stems from my thinking about, didn't we have a bit of a conversation at one point about somebody being asked and to administer a medication and they could say yes or no to it? What was that?
That was for
Medically
medical marijuana.
Okay, because that was still, yeah,
Right.
okay.
My understanding is this policy is that by July 1st, in order to be compliant with law, we have to adopt this. Is that
Yes,
pretty much?
yes. We have to adopt a policy for how this process
Could that
is
include
considered.
medical marijuana?
So there are different, so prescription medication or students receiving medication at school is already set in policy. This wouldn't be part of that. This is specific to a provider coming into the school and providing treatments at the school. And we already do this to a certain extent with private duty nurses. So private duty nurses already come into our schools and provide services for some of our students who have medical needs that they're able to support with. So we have some experience with this. This is just a requirement that this bill put in place to really adopt a policy for how this is done uniformly across the state.
Okay, so let's start with our nurses.
Well, no, I just have a question about, don't know quite how to ask this. So it's a two-part question. Does it have to be a board certified ABA therapist, or could it be the tech who comes to the school?
So that's part of that definition. So it defines like what licensure, what their, a lot of it has to kind of tax back to DORA and how they're licensed. So
Okay.
it's defined clearly what that is.
Okay.
Yep.
And then they would be following the treatment plan of the own agency? Because my understanding is the school district hired an ABA therapist, an ABA certified?
School district hired a BCBA.
Uh-huh.
That's actually been a position we've had. We weren't able to hire it this year, but we did hire somebody for next year. So our BCBA, the district employee, works alongside our special education teams around the delivery of FAPE in our school
Okay.
district. And so their main role is to to look at what students need to receive their educational services and have access. Treatment plans and those kind of things would be outlined. This really speaks to more so how the decision is made, whether that treatment happens at school or not, and then the stipulations for how it can occur at school.
So the treatment plan would be with that private agency,
Correct.
and they would be implementing that into, okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Anybody else have questions about it? Defer to the nurses. That's why I went to
No, I
the
have a question. So my question, just as far as, so like under determination whether medically necessary treatment must be provided, under number 2, it says when determining whether medically necessary treatment is required within the school setting, the student's IEP team or Section 504 team will invite the private healthcare specialist who ordered or recommended the medically necessary treatment to attend the meeting. And then it says they're encouraged to submit information in writing that can be reviewed. Is it intended that if they submit the information in writing, they don't have to come in person, or are they expected to do both?
I think that could be, this is new, of course, so I don't want to get too far out, but I think that could be negotiated with the family. I think there would be potential for that if information is provided. We want to invite, we always, if in a 504 or an IEP meeting, we always want to invite anyone who has pertinent information in case questions come up. So I think there could possibly be a potential where information is provided. If no questions come up that require that person, maybe they're not at that meeting, but if questions come up, it's always helpful to have them there for clarity.
I mean, just because logistically, I think it would be hard getting a provider there for, if there's.
And we also offer virtual
Okay.
meetings. We do a lot of that right now, especially with outside providers and even
Okay.
parents. So their virtual attendance is definitely a
That
possibility.
would be easier.
Okay. Yeah, either of you?
I guess on that, just to make sure, the wording is are invited, not that would be a barrier. So I could see a situation where the provider just can't make it work no matter what accommodations we make. I'd hate for that to be, okay, perfect. That's all I can say.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
we have, with having 504 and IEP decision makers, we have all the processes in place to handle anything like that. So we would not deprive that conversation because of scheduling or boundaries.
Yeah? No? No? Okay. Stu? Nancy?
I guess I'd like to understand, so when this is happening, because some medical practitioner has said that this is necessary, what would be a reason that the district would say no? I mean, I'm trying to think why or how we would say no
Yeah.
to some medically prescribed treatment.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and that's what teams will be working through. I think there's a lot of variables and factors around impact on the students' access to education. Those would all be questions that the team will have to work through. It's hard because it would be really case by case.
And then, but if we did say no, there is, and is this appeal process, is that new? So you guys don't really have it yet?
It's required by there is already an appeal process, as you all know, with 504 and IEP. That's already in statute and set. The policy does require there to be an appeal step. So that'll be something we will develop. It's basically within the lens of 504 IEP. If there's a disagreement at that meeting, it then gets elevated to somebody designated in the district to be the decision maker around, I don't like we're using the word decision maker, but they would review the situation and provide an appeal to the parent or the family.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Anybody else?
This one was passed in 2022. Have you had a lot of parents ask about this and when they could possibly bring in an outside provider, and do you anticipate that this will be big?
We have had some requests. I don't know, I don't have numbers,
Sure,
but
yeah.
I would say we've had, it's not like 100 requests, but we've had several. The other piece that's not outlined in the policy, but is another component that we are going to be doing is we're required to monitor this and submit that to the CDE. So, and that's also going to be made available for public viewing or public to be able to see that. That data will begin to become available January of 2025. So we'll be collecting that this year and submitting it to CDE next year around this time, and then that'll be published. And I think part of that is to try to get statewide a sense of what the need is here, what the request level is, how it's working, to be able to guide us in decisions going forward.
Okay. I was going to add to what Laszlo said. This is, we got help from CASB, all school districts did, because this is what they have put out in support of this new law. So I just want to let you all know that we didn't need to consult to create anything unique. This has been provided for us.
Yep.
This comes back to us at our next meeting then, I assume.
Yep, correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. 3.4, this is the first reading of resolution ECAF-R, use of video and audio monitoring. And I have down Melissa and Todd, correct? You're not.
She's gonna come back.
Okay.
Hello again, Madam President. We have an adoption of policy ECAF, and I'm just going to jump right in here to tell you that it is the anchor policy that we were specifically missing. We've had the regulation for years.
So Melissa, we had the regulation before we had the policy?
That is what we have discovered.
That's not usually the way it works. Okay, just wanted to make sure I understood what you were saying.
So, normally with policies, we don't go through a Stride 2025 connection, but I did want to throw one up here tonight and just say, this is good stewardship of resources. This is a collaboration between learning services and operations. It is a way to be compliant with the law without really adding a whole lot. It just adds a process, so it's relatively simple, we hope. So while I'm not going to read all these next couple of slides, I do want to have them up here of what's driving us to be able to have this anchor policy. FERPA, as you know, is the protections that we have around student records. And so, many things become student records, but now in our kind of new day and age, a video or surveillance, tape of a student can become a student record. So I'm just going to go ahead and you can just move through these slides. I just want you to see that. I'm telling you in plain language, but here it is kind of written out in legalese around using photo or video for different reasons. So disciplinary action, to be able to see if the student was a victim of something, something that happened, not just there they go, they're walking by. So you can go through this again. And so what we need to be able to do is, normally we have video surveillance running 24/7. And hypothetically, if something were to happen to a student and at any point in time we chose to review that footage, it then does become a student record. And so this is where Todd and his division come in terms of how do we save that record, and otherwise our system is designed to destroy after a certain amount of, we don't have 10 years worth of video surveillance lying around. So how do we preserve that so that it's accessible to be able to either continue an investigation or be able to show a behavior pattern or any number of things that were tied to FERPA that are in the slide deck. So I want to go ahead and let Todd talk about really the process piece, which is the part that was added to the anchor policy, so that we have a process that recognizes that video surveillance is indeed a student record. So, go ahead.
Yeah, some of the main difference, or I guess the main difference is, well, good evening, Board of Education. The difference here in the change is previously footage was kept and tagged if there was a police report and case number. So that process is pretty clean. There's a chain of custody that there's actually a case number issued. We then bookmark or save the video, and then it goes as part of the police investigation. When it becomes part of student records, it's just a different process and different, a whole other way to look at how we're looking at video, how we save it, and then how do we support our schools and making sure that we're properly saving that video. So in the next slide, in the next one, this goes more over the law enforcement piece, but this is really the change behind the policy is we are now going to train all administration July 20th of this year about what this new policy looks like to make sure we're capturing the proper video. So well, we looked at several ways to do it. It's quite a bit of workload, when they're looking at video and how do you bookmark, where do you save it for schools to then go through that process. So what we came up with is just a central location to say, put your, document it. So here's what we're looking for, put it in a Google form. It'll go to our dispatch center, which is where the video goes. They'll actually bookmark it and then save it in a secure location for then future use and or viewing, so because it becomes part of that record. So it'll be tagged with the school location, date, incident date, and then time frame. So we'll extract that, and then that'll be maintained as part of a student record, connected then to the student. So that's working through the changes in the policy. One, getting the first policy in place, but then the process is really the bigger piece here, and how we actually protect ourselves to maintain those records. So that's coming to our administration in July. But yeah, that's what we'll be working on and moving forward with into next school year.
Okay.
So from there, are there any questions?
Yeah, start over here. Let's check with Dawn first, then, since we did our nurses last. No?
Did you mention how many years it's stored?
We actually store for 30 days. So
Okay,
once,
20
yeah,
days?
30 days.
Okay.
So once the 31st day it starts recording from the front again, yeah. So yeah, only 30 days, we don't have years.
So when you capture it, then that footage can be stored on a student record, is that?
Yeah, it can be stored, yeah.
For any length of time.
For the appropriate time, depending on the statute of stored records, but yeah, in essence, it gets what they say is bookmarked, and it's really extracting that video and then saving it separately.
Okay. All right. Stu?
In the red line version, it talks about the student's educational record and a staff member's personnel record. Are the rules essentially the same for both? Or how does this relate to a staff member?
So FERPA is not, that's just for student records.
Oh, that's just student records.
So I won't answer for human resources, but personnel, this can also be used to make a personnel record as well. But
Yes,
I
I
wouldn't know what
remember that from when I read it.
laws would be governing that.
Okay.
Nancy?
I don't think so.
Any others? Okay, thank you very much. We'll see this again. Thank you. All right, thanks. Right. 3.5 is the first reading, policy CC, administrative organization.
This is your breathing error.
Yeah, so this is pretty close. Every once in a while, I scan board policy just to make sure that it's up to date. And I came across board policy CC, which was last passed and adopted prior to 1985, so that always piques my interest. And basically, at the time, back prior to 1985, the district had 4 major divisions. We now have 6 major divisions, and they're called something different. So this Policy just basically calls out the divisions as they so stand today in 2023. And so, as you know, the district has 6 major divisions, and those are learning services, business services, operations, human resources, innovative technology services, and communications and community resources. So we will ask the board on June 21st to support policy CC, which calls out the correct divisions in the Thompson School District. Are there any questions? So I'm taking all the easy ones tonight.
You are. All right, no questions. All right, easy for you then. All right. 3.6 is the State of Colorado Interest-Free Cash Flow Loan Program Resolution. This is not anything we're moving down, or is it all going down?
Yeah,
to
so
the others?
as Gordon makes his way up here, and he'll be in this chair for some time, we have a suite of things that we're going to be bringing forward to you right now, all budget related. Gordon will cover 2 of the 5 things right now, and then the other 3 who will go into greater detail under. So he'll illuminate that for you right now, but just for purposes of agenda, we are quote-unquote teeing these up for you in this meeting, but we'll go into greater detail during the discussion portion on 3 of the 5. Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Madam President, members of the board, I'm Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. The first item, agenda item 3.6, is the State of Colorado Interest-Free Loan Program. While not directly associated with the budget for next year, it is an important consideration. This is a program that the district has participated in over the last 6 years, and would intend to participate in with the board's approval in the 23-24. The reason this comes about is, and especially next year, I'll explain that in just a second, but there's a significant portion of the district's revenue that comes from property taxes, and those property taxes are received typically March through June of each year. So certainly loaded to the back half of the year. Our expenditures in the district are generally spread fairly evenly over the 12 months. So we typically have enough cash balance to get through the first 6 months of the year or so, but when we start getting to that December, January timeframe, our cash balances have been depleted, and we haven't received the new revenue that we anticipate getting for property taxes. So the state recognized this quite some time ago. I don't know how long this program has been in place, but I'm going to guess 20 years plus. So it's available to districts to participate, to borrow against the proceeds that are very likely assured to be coming from property taxes. The challenge for the 23-24 year is that with the new statutes that are in place, Senate Bill 23-303, which has to do with the reduction of property taxes, Proposition HH, which is scheduled to be on the ballot in November. That changes some of the measurements, and it really, we've seen across the state, large increases in property values, less large increases in assessed valuation, meaning that a bigger portion of revenue will be locally funded for the School Finance Act portion especially. It's a state portion and a local portion, and there will be more dollars that will be associated or collected with the local portion, thus creating even more of a demand than what we've seen in the past. I was on a call about a week ago on this program. In the past, there's been about 15 districts across the state that have participated. On that call, I think there were 51 districts that were concerned about this, and I would imagine it would have been even more that there were districts that didn't know what they didn't know at that point. So the groups that are managing this at the state level will bring those districts along. But this request will be to bring back to the board at the next meeting and ask for adoption of a resolution for borrowing. It is debt borrowing, so it requires board approval. The dollar amount of that, I've always been in that $10 to $12 million range. Some of the preliminary figures that I saw for a couple of the other districts was triple or quadruple what their normal borrowing was based on what their anticipated local property tax collections could be. So I want to just give the board a heads up on that it could be a larger number than we've seen in the past. And you can see in the memo what the dollar amounts are. And then also attached to this is the resolution that the board will be asked to adopt with the updated borrowing amount. And this isn't a one and done. We have the ability to come back in October once we have a better feel for what cash flows look like. There's 2 borrowings that the state does. So we have the ability, if we don't request enough money, enough borrowing in this first tranche, we have the ability to do that in the second tranche as well.
So do you anticipate that this large amount will be steady then, or is it just this year it's higher?
It depends on legislation. It depends on what could happen at the ballot with Proposition HH in November. There's a lot of moving pieces right now around local property taxation that could have a bearing on this. So I would imagine, yes, it likely will have an elevated level moving forward.
All right. Going back over with Stu. Questions? Nancy? Okay. And we'll see this in June, on the 21st.
Correct.
Okay.
Next item, the next 3 items, 3.7, 3.8, and 3.9 are all resolutions associated with the 23-24 proposed budget. And as Dr. Schaefer alluded to, I would like to postpone that discussion until we get to the discussion of the presentation on the 23-24 proposed budget.
You just answered my question.
Good. That's one less than.
I was like, why are we discussing this first?
So we're going to 10 then, 3.10 on the agenda?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Item 3.10 does pertain to the 22-23, and when I say 22, I mean 2022-2023 budget year that we're in, so the current year that we're in. The budget process every year involves adoption of the budget by the board in June, the ability to adopt amendments to that budget in January, by just January 31st, and then past practice has been to make any final adjustments to the budget in June at the end of the year. So June at the beginning of the year, January, and June at the end of the year, all pertaining to the 2022-23 budget. So the 5 items that are being requested for the board's approval, I'll just go through these very quickly. They involve different funds. All 5 are in different funds. So the first item is the request to actually reduce our budget, the original budget that was adopted, and for the general fund, and that is due to savings from a staffing perspective. So about $3.1 million is anticipated for positions that were budgeted but not filled over the year. So we anticipate less expenditure than what we had budgeted. The second item for supplemental request is in the Student Activities Fund, which is Fund 23. This is largely fundraising activities. When the budget was set for 22-23, we looked back at the prior 3 years of activity and set the budget accordingly in line with those expectations. The challenge that was maybe not fully appreciated was the impact of COVID in 2 or 3 of those years. That resulted in lower expenditures than what we actually had when we had a more typical year in 22-23. The expenditures have increased in that. So dollars that have been raised or earned in that fund, we anticipate approximately $100,000 increase beyond the amount that was originally budgeted in the Student Activities Fund. Third item is fee-supported fund 29. This is largely items associated with the early childhood because that's a tuition program at some level. Obviously, we have Head Start and district participation, but there's a tuition component to that as well. And then the facilities use and rental that the district has as well. Same thing, we had lower or suppressed expenditures in the prior 2 or 3 years before the 22-23 budget was set on, and we anticipate about $200,000 more in expenditures for the 22-23 year. Fourth item is in the bond redemption fund. This is the fund that deals with the debt service of the district for the outstanding bonds, so the principal and interest payments. Interest payments twice a year and principal payments once a year. It's not anything to do with those payments. Those were adequately budgeted for. It was an increase in the bank fees that are associated. We have a custodian. UNB is our custodian of these funds. They're the ones that process those payments and make the payments to all the bondholders that are out there. So there's a slight increase, about $25,000 that we anticipate for that fund. And the last and final request is in the district's building fund. These are the bond projects that are taking place. And it's the same comment as last year. As you can see, as a result of efficient planning, availability of contractors, and favorable weather, more work than was originally contemplated took place. So we have all of the funds that when the bonds were sold went into the building fund, and then we've used those funds to pay for projects. We just got more done in the 22-23 year than what was originally budgeted. And that's about a $5 million ask or supplemental budget request. That's a good thing. It means more projects are getting done. So those are the 5 items that are on the supplemental budget request that will be brought forth by resolution, and the resolution is attached here as well. That's the resolution that we will be asking for the board's consideration of adoption at the next meeting.
Okay. Questions? I think we start with Nancy this time. Nope, Stu? Okay. We'll see this one back then, right?
That will come back next meeting as well, yes.
All right. Thank you. All right, we'll see you again in just a little while.
I'm going to leave my...
All right. Item 3.11 is just the standard action consent items like gifts and donations or personnel, that we will see the full long list on the 21st, and that was just a space holder basically for those items. All right, so it includes all of our pieces that were prepping us for the board meeting. So now we're going to find out from Stu what's been happening with the legislative update.
If you'd like to open to that part of the agenda, I have a couple of corrections to make, and then some kind of surprise news that Alexandra and I were talking about. She heard it on the news, and I actually got an email from CASB to let me know this. The legislative session actually ended a few weeks ago. One might think that that means that's the end of all things legislative when the session comes to an end. However, as we discovered today, and I'll share with you, that's really not the case. What I did was I went back through my notes and the CASB website, and what you see in front of you is a list of what I consider to be the most significant pieces of education legislation that was part of this legislative session. There are many more. Many of them I've already talked to you about. I'm not actually going to go through this information with you, but I thought rather than giving you the bill title, I'd give you a brief summary of the content of each of the bills. If you'll scroll down to SB 23-287, this is the School Finance Act. When I went to the last Legislative Resolutions Committee meeting, the figure that was used was $5.1 billion for funding schools. It's actually $9.1 billion for funding schools, which is good news for us. The average per pupil revenue in the state is $10,579. That's more than what we get, and maybe at some point Gordon could give us just a couple minute explanation as to why what we receive is about $500 less than the state average. Now, the surprise, you remember we talked 2 or 3 times about the bill related to the open meetings law, especially as it relates to executive session. And just as a quick review, what that bill would have brought is the opportunity for a school board, for example, which went into executive session and perhaps didn't cross all the T's and dot all the I's exactly correctly, would have an opportunity to, I think the word that was used in the bill was to cure anything that was out of order and therefore avoid a lawsuit. Today, Governor Polis vetoed the bill. It was quite a surprise, and it had passed easily in both houses. It's been sitting on his desk since the 17th of May, and today he vetoed it. And what I received from CASB is that his feeling was that if this bill were to pass, it interferes with transparency and accountability and prevents unrepresented citizens from recouping costs in an open meetings law case. And so the bill is gone, at least as a result of this legislative session. Could it be reintroduced? Yes, it could be. But that was that's the exciting bit of news that I have to share with you. So that's the end of my report.
Interesting. Okay, I'm going to say a 5-minute break. We want chocolate, grab some chocolate, because we are now going to get into some more intense learning.
Enjoy it.
So get up and you can get rid of your food or plates if you want to.
Pardon me? Yeah. Happened this morning, I guess. Quite a surprise, I think.
I have my own spreadsheet. I have my own spreadsheet about 12 times. There is. That's right. I didn't get a chance to look at
Oh, okay. All right, thank you.
No, I'm she lives on College Street, and her living room looks Yeah, I was
Of the school? Yeah. Cool.
I know.
And it's nice.
And
I love my
I mean, it's right here. Yeah, it's right. I mean, they have a lot of security. It's nice. There's no real. Sure.
I was in training again. Can you believe it?
Yes.
I live in Shocker.
Yeah, it's a.
Oh, in training?
Looks like
Yesterday, we had like a full day with no rain. It was amazing.
Monday was very little.
I'm an 8-year-old.
I was outside working most of the day yesterday.
Yeah, but I know, like the one chance.
In fact, we got one in Maryland and until New York City there was a
Did you hear too about that bill?
Yeah,
Had you heard it?
Oh, I can't remember these emails from Silence. I think it was the part where
That's,
I think that was his.
that was one of the things. That's kind of what I summarized. Yep. Never knows.
Given the exception of time, some top items, carry over.
We're ready to begin. Maybe we should have a PD whose presentation.
Or maybe you can just turn part of it over. Nancy will now explain this part.
Oh, yeah. Well, I like that.
Just parse that out.
Gordon, when you're talking about this next part, will we go through this or will we need the device? This
Okay. Oh, she's here. Okay. All right. We're going to have Gordon Gorkin begin with the three topics that he left behind at the other piece. So, Gordon, welcome back.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Schaefer, again, Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. Welcome to the wonderful world of budgeting. The documents that I put in front of you is the bigger document is what I'm going to speak to here from a fairly high level, but certainly able to answer questions. So Moving past the, let me also say the 3 individual paper-clipped items you have are the 3 resolutions that I referenced earlier that we'll talk about briefly at the end of this presentation. That will jump right into the presentation itself. So page 3, first let me start by saying that the budget process is not something that's done over a 2-week period and then put together and asking the board to approve. It's really work started in earnest in mid-December of last year. We have templates that go out to all the departments, so they have ownership in their individual budgets. They have the opportunity to advocate for, to make allocation of funds in areas that they know from their constituents within that particular budget area of where the dollars are, where there's a need for dollars to be spent. Negotiations is certainly a big part of that from a labor standpoint, with about 85% of our budget being associated with labor and benefits. So that being said, it's a big process, a long process, and we're nearing hopefully the finish line at the June 21st meeting, when I'll be back in front of the board asking for adoption of the budget. So page 3, I'll talk about the key components that go into the budget, and I'll, again, at a very, I won't say a very high level, but hopefully brief, but yet thorough. So the first item of consideration is student membership. So the School Finance Act calls for funding based on the number of students times the per pupil revenue that we get for those students. So there's a difference between student membership, which you see in the first block of figures there, and funded pupil count. The key items I'll mention about student membership is that we're budgeting or proposing for the budget of 23-24 a slight decrease, and slight meaning 39 students. That's a small decrease. And I'm somewhat confident in that number, as I told the board last week, last presentation, the only absolute guarantee that I will give you is that this budget will change. So the 39 student decrease is actually a positive now. We track enrollment throughout the year, and at the end of the year right now, we've had less of a decline from October count than we typically see. So that means that the slope of decline is flattening, which is a good thing. So thus 39 students down projected for next year. Also, you'll see in several areas here that the charter schools are recorded separately. We record their student counts, their PPR, the MLO dollars as revenue in the district, and we are a pass-through agent for those. We also have recorded then the expense side for those transfers that take place. So that's why you see them separated out. Funded pupil count is actually what we're funded on, and you can see for the district on line 5, 123.8 decrease. And you say, why are we down only 39 students, but that funded pupil count is down 3 or 4 times that amount? The biggest item contributing to that is the averaging mechanism, which is in the school finance formula, which says in a declining enrollment environment, a district has the ability to take the larger of the current year enrollment or the average of up to current year and the 4 prior years, so a 5-year average. So we have dropped off then for next year a higher past year and replaced that with last year, or 22-23, which is a lower figure, thus bringing down the average, thus bringing down the funded pupil count that we have. The last item on this page is the per pupil revenue. You heard Mr. Boyd reference the $10,034.16 is our PPR, the state average at $10,500. I won't go into that explanation right now, but of what causes that difference, why we're below that. But we are one of, used to be 13, for next year is projected to be 11 floor funded districts, meaning we are the lowest funded on a per pupil basis. And it has to do with a lot of different things in the School Finance Act formula, the factors that are involved, cost of living factor, size factor, a variety of different things that drive that number. But an increase of $960.60 in PPR from what was budgeted last year to what we're proposing for the budget next year is the largest increase in a single year that I've seen in my tenure with the district, which is 8 years now of going through the budgeting process. Moving on to the next page, page 4. This is the School Finance Act, or SFA. You heard me reference in one of the earlier agenda items that local share versus the state share. That's it shows what that is. As the local share gets larger, the state share gets smaller. The bucket never overflows is the analogy that I've given. Essentially, in the simplest of terms, our School Finance Act funding is funded pupil count times PPR equals School Finance Act funding. And how that's collected from a state level or a local level is what changes, but the bucket never overflows. Again, you can see a $9 million increase on row 4. That's, again, a very healthy, large increase from the School Finance Act funding perspective. To see that increase. The inflation plays a big part in that calculation, and the factor used for inflation for 23-24 is 8%. So that's helped drive that up. Another key factor is the budget stabilization factor that figures into that. And there was, in the legislature elected to buy down or reduce the budget stabilization factor by $180 million this year statewide. That's a big decrease in that, leaving the balance statewide at 141.3 million, I believe is the number. So 140 million, 141 million, with language written into the School Finance Act legislation that balance is to be removed next year, which is, again, a positive for the district. There's a lot of legislation out there that is going to affect this over the course of the year, and what happens in November and with the ballot Proposition HH. There's several pieces of legislation that's still kind of a fluid moving target, but that's thus the need to have an amended budget opportunity in January of next year, when we'll true up the funded pupil count, as well as any changes that we'll know by then we'll know exactly what our assessed valuations are and be able to true that up in January of next year. Page 5 is mill levy override. That's another significant source of revenue for the district. You can see again the entities, Thompson School District and then New Vision and Loveland Classical. We're required by law to share proceeds from the MLOs with the charter schools. The assumptions that have been made, this is based on assessed valuation. So one of the key assumptions is how much do we think our assessed valuation is going to be. And as property owners, anybody that is a property owner, you've received your notice of valuation, and after you picked yourself up off the floor, you said, how can this be? How is this going to impact me? The assumptions that have been made for our purposes of how this revenue is calculated for the MLOs comes from the Larimer County Assessor's Office, because that's where 98% of our assessed valuation in the district is. Their estimate for Loveland, and I've narrowed it down just to pick a number, have a reliable number to use, or hopefully a good number, is a 37% increase in property value, and 50% of that amount, based on some of the legislation that's in place, waivers of the first $50,000 that everybody can take off of their residential value, a variety of different mechanisms. 50% of that 37% or 18.5% increase in assessed valuation. So those are the assumptions that have been made. That's truly the definition of an assumption, because we don't know what those numbers will be. We'll have our first look at that from a preliminary standpoint at the end of August. The county assessors have to send a preliminary number, and then we'll have a better idea in November what that will be. The 3 MLOs we have, the 99 MLO, that's capped at $7.5 million based on ballot language that was in place when it was adopted by voters. So the revenue will never go above $7.5 million, no matter what happens to assessed valuation within the district boundaries. 2006 ballot is very similar to that, capped at $6,540,000. Again, it will never increase beyond that amount. And then the 2018 MLO is a fixed mill, 7.6 mills of the times the assessed valuation within the district. And that's projected to give us, with that significant increase of 37% on property value, 18.5% in AV, an additional $4.3 million for the district, 5.2 overall. So about $900,000 of that that increase is allocated to the two charter schools. At the bottom of that page, you will see other revenue. So there's a few miscellaneous categories there. Categorical funding are primarily three things: a transportation reimbursement, a career technical education reimbursement, and a special ed reimbursement. When I say reimbursement, this does not come anywhere close to filling the need of the total cost that we incur. It's about 25 cents on the dollar that we're reimbursed from the state level. One positive is additional funding for special ed that's been directed by the state. That is about a $500,000 increase for the district next year for special ed funding. Specific ownership taxes that are outside of the School Finance Act. That's people that are licensing their vehicles. There's a very small portion of licensing fees that come to the district. A very important consideration I should have mentioned on the student counts and the funded pupil count has to do with universal preschool. So that's a new program that we're trying to figure out for 23-24. A lot of unknowns still in that program of how it's going to operate, how many students are going to show up. A pretty good idea of what our rate will be depending on the number of students that show up, but still a lot of unknowns associated with that. So in the past, early childhood special education students and Colorado preschool program students have been part of our funded pupil count. This year, next year, 23-24, those students for early childhood or UPK have been stripped out of that calculation. So they're no longer in those figures, and they're funded not from CDE as part of PPR, but through the Colorado Department of Early Childhood, a newly created department at the state level. So that's why you see on row 22, 0 for 22-23 and 2.8 million of anticipated revenue for 23-24. And then all other revenue is down about $1 million. That's almost solely related to a one-time sale of broadband spectrum that the district had last year. It was about $1 million benefit that we got. That was a one-time transaction in nature. Now we transition on page 6 into expenditures in the general fund. All of these figures that I'm talking about are general fund right now. Keep that in mind as well. So we have full-time equivalent costs, which are our labor costs, essentially, salaries and benefits. The first item that I'll mention is for benefits, our health insurance. As we typically see, there was an increase this year. About a $900,000 increase for the employee-only premium across the district that the board authorized earlier for the district to absorb, so that's not passed on to employees, so a $900,000 increase for that. It's broken down here by license, classified, and EPT. I can tell you that through the process of negotiations and working with each of the employee groups, licensed increased with the amounts being a $6,000 add to each cell on the license salary schedule. That brought our starting salary to $50,000 for the district, so a brand new teacher with a bachelor's degree and no experience will start at $50,000. And conversely, at the bottom right of the salary schedule, that's about a $95,000 salary at the bottom right of the schedule, meaning the most education and the most years of experience would be $95,000. Classified staff, the agreement that was reached was we have ranges for different positions, ranges 5 through 30. So for ranges 5 through 12, there was a 7.5% increase to those salaries. And for ranges 5 through 30, there was a 12.5% increase. Part of the reason for the disparity is 2 years ago, when the district had the initiative to increase our minimum starting pay in the district to $15 per hour, that impacted ranges 5 through 12. Those were the ones that got an increase. Anybody below that did not. So we moved everybody in range 4 to $15 an hour, range 5 went to $15.20, $15.40, $15.60, kind of like that. It only impacted those first four or five ranges. That's why that was part of the rationale and the difference between the percentage increases for next year in classified. APT, the agreement that was reached was a 7.5% increase for APT staff. Those are very healthy increase numbers. When you talk 7.5% to 12.5%, on the license salary schedule, a $6,000 add to each cell, those are significant increases that were only brought about by that increase in the PPR and increase in property values, so the MLO collections for the 2018 MLO. That's what helped fund those. I'm not going to go into detail on the non-FTE costs that you see down below there in rows 13 through 18 on page 6, but know that we'll talk about those in a little more detail here as we move forward. Page 7 is just a little bit of call-out detail for our non-FTE. So we have salaries and benefits that are our FTE costs. Then we have everything else, our non-FTE costs. And there are salaries and benefits included in the non-FTE. And you would ask, as a logical person would, why do we have salaries and benefits in non-FTE costs? FTE is really the contract for the positions that we have within the district, so the day-to-day jobs that people are doing. The salaries and benefits in non-FTE have to do with extra hours, essentially. So all of our substitute costs are in non-FTE, even though that's labor and benefits. Our extra duty contracts, so somebody that is a sports coach or sponsor of a club, those extra duty contracts, extra hour contracts are in the non-FTE portion. It's the positions themselves for, shall we say, for lack of a better term, the day job of employees is in FTE, and the extra hours related functions or expenditures are in the non-FTE side of things. So page 7 just shows you the top 10 areas of non-FTE expenditures that took place. So somewhat surprisingly to me, and I look at this every day, was that utilities district-wide was our number one. When you consolidate those, that has to do with a variety of different things. It's the utilities in all the school buildings, all the admin building, the transportation building. It's also the utilities for the swimming pools, the aquatic centers. That's the general fund support of those operations. So about $4.2 million anticipated for expenditures in utilities. And you can look down the list there and see. The one item I will point out is item 6, or row 6, the school resource officers, a $528,000 increase. There are 3 items that are making that such a significant increase, and we'll touch on that again in a second. But those items are, first, a budget miss from 22-23. We failed to budget fully for the positions that we had in place. So we corrected that in 23-24, so that's part of the increase. Another part of that increase is the addition of 1 SRO through the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. And the third item that influences that is the addition of a second co-responder team that goes into they're recorded under the school resource officer item there. So just a snapshot of some of the top 10 items, if you will, for what's in the non-FTE, excluding the charter transfers, because we'll see that in just a second, that the charter transfers is by far the largest piece of non-FTE expenditures, which is their portion of the PPR and the MLOs that I referenced earlier. Page 8 is just a little more call-out detail. There's been some interest in what are our special education costs? What are the real costs that we have? So this is an accumulation or an estimation of what those dollars are. So you can see the different types of expenditures that go into that. Where I referenced that we aren't reimbursed nearly at the level for the expenditures that we have. On rows 14 and 15, you can see that 5.8 million reimbursement as a categorical revenue item is 30.7%. I would venture a guess that in the detail up above, we haven't captured every special education item that's up there as well. So that would make that percentage down more in that 25%, 25 cents on the dollar that we're reimbursed. Page 9 is pulling all of those pages that we've just talked about, all those pieces into one income statement, if you will. That's the for-profit term for this. In governmental accounting, it's the change in fund balance. Is our revenue more than our expenditures? In this case, yes. If you look at row 28, the second column from the left, you can see the $1,010,228. That means our expenditures are $1 million less than the revenue, so we are anticipating to add $1 million to the fund balance in the general fund for next year, meaning we have a balanced budget from the budget perspective. I will caution that is while $1 million is a lot of money, that's 7 figures of money. When you compare that to the overall budget, it is about 0.5% outperformance, if you will, or balanced budget. So 0.5% yields that $1 million. $1 million is better than 500,000. They taught me that in accounting school. So that is that's a good thing to add $1 million and make the significant increases that we did from a wages and benefits standpoint is still pretty remarkable, I would say. Moving on, page 10, now we start getting into more of the requirements of what we have to do from the budget perspective. These are CDE requirements. We have to present the budget by program codes, they call it. So we have object codes and program codes and grant codes and SRE codes. All of this is very prescriptive by the chart of accounts that is published by CDE that all school districts have to report to. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but as you can see on the left, the program codes are what you see there. We don't just have one of these for each one of the program codes. So when I say 2100s for the student support on the second line, that's 2100, 2101, 2105, 2150. We have a lot of keys or accounts that are in each one of these areas. But I thought it would be beneficial for the board and the broader community as you're reviewing the budget to know what description of type of costs go into each one of those program codes. And that's from a labor, salaries and benefits standpoint, as well as expenditure standpoint. These next pages are just that. It's accumulating that data, the detail that's associated with arriving at those summary figures that we've looked at and breaking those down on a by program basis. So you can see in the first section that is just that. How many, what do we have in total expenditures for each one of those? The transfers column requires a little bit of explanation. Those are dollars that are transferred out of the general fund to other funds, meaning that the general fund is supporting the costs, some of the costs, not all the costs, some of the costs or some of the revenue for other funds where specific activity takes place. That's what those transfers are. So the perfect example is capital projects, Fund 43. So the general fund pays for that, if you will, but governmental accounting says that's a very specific function for capital projects that should be in a separate fund, which is Fund 43. So it becomes an expenditure in the general fund that's transferred to Fund 43 and becomes a revenue item there, and then the expenditure activity is reflected in the capital projects fund. That's what those transfers represent.
Gordon, can you just on lines 4 and 5 provide the difference between general administration and school administration?
I would refer you back to the previous page. So general administration, reading that, activities concerned with establishing and administering policy for operating the school district. Do not include the chief business official here, but in support services. You can tell that's not me writing that, that is direct language from CDE. So my costs are not in that category, where the 2400s, which is school administration, are activities concerned with overall administrative responsibility for a school or a combination of schools. Think principals in that particular item. Did that satisfy?
Yeah, so plain English, general administration would be this building, 1% of the budget, and then school administration, about 6% of the budget, that would be school operations.
That would be a very succinct way of putting it, which you are more capable of. The bottom section of this page shows you FTE costs and non-FTE costs for each one of those categories. All of the transfers come out of non-FTE. We'll see that as we get to the FTE or non-FTE detail. They are highlighted in yellow on that. So those items are the ones that are being transferred out of the general fund to another fund. Moving on to page 12. Again, just another way to look at this of what the total costs by each one of the program codes are. So it shows all of the salaries and benefits in licensed, classified, and APT, and then also the non-FTE associated with that particular program code, which is noted in blue on that page. The next few pages, 13 through through 17, are the number of FTE, this year's budget, so 22-23 versus 23-24, that are in, again, by program code, by position, so by title. So some of these have, as you look at the first one, and they're broken down by the 3 employee groups that we have: licensed, classified, APT. So you look at the first item on page 13, 542.1 FTE. Those are the rate, and it says ratios. What's ratio? Those are ratio-driven teacher positions based on our pupil to teacher ratio. That's why it's labeled as ratios. So we have 542.1 FTE associated with that. Some of these items have 1 FTE associated with that particular title. So you'll see the gamut there from 30 to 500 to 1 in different areas there. And again, you can see the comparison of budget for 22-23 versus budget for 23-24 from an FTE perspective by each category. Licensed first, the next 2 pages are classified, and the last 2 pages of that section are APT positions. Now we move to page 18 through 23, which is the 296 rows or items of non-FTE costs. So again, we, in the spirit of transparency and use of resources, we elect to not, while they're rolled up, these numbers are rolled up in some of the summary documents we've already talked about. This is all of the detail that's associated with those areas. Again, sorted by program code, and then the column headings, when you see salaries and benefits, purchase services, those are the object codes that I referenced before. Again, very prescriptive by CDE of how we have to report that. I'm just going to touch on 7 quick items here and talk about what those are. And I'm looking at the third number column from the left, which is variance. So it's looking at the budget for 22-23 versus the budget for 23-24, and then what the difference between those is. I'd just like to reference any item that's greater than a $200,000 variance from last year to next year, from this year to next year. So the first one is on row 3, substitutes licensed. That is a $525,000 increase. The 2 items that are in there the most that are driving that increase is the that weren't budgeted last year, which are the 10 full-time substitutes that the district, the board authorized. So we have a built-in 10 substitutes that are employed by the district. So the first 10 subs on a daily basis, the fills, those people go out and fill those sub areas. The second item that's in that line item is the incentive. Once a substitute reaches 10 days of subbing for the district in a month, there's a $300 stipend that's allowed to them. That took our fill rates for substitutes from in the 56% range to 85 to 90%. Again, the initiative to have an educator in front of kids, and we're not having to have one more duty assigned to teachers that are in the building to cover this class or that class for an absence, those two items have really helped. Row 12 on page 18 is a $208,000 increase for post-secondary scholarships. That is concurrent enrollment and Ascent students, which are the fifth-year seniors. Again, the popularity of those programs where students can take college-level courses and credit is increasing. This is a good thing for our students. Even though it comes at a cost, it is a good thing for students. Row 31 is K-8 summer school of $300,000 increase, zero this year because those costs that summer school is going on right now is being incurred or recorded through ESSER, the ESSER funds. Next year, those ESSER dollars or grant dollars are not available, so we have to absorb that into the general fund if that program is to continue. That's what that item is. Right below that, 32 is textbooks and instructional materials, a decrease of $250,700. That is purchase of curriculum. We had a big curriculum purchase year this year and bought for next year, 23-24, so we were able to reduce that budget, the necessary or needed budget for next year because we incurred those expenses in 22-23. Page 19. Row 60, student technology, a $200,000 increase. That's the student replacement cycle that Kelly Sanger in our IPS department has developed for the refresh of the student devices. I should point out the yellow highlighting that you see here, those are the transfers. When you see the yellow highlighting, those are dollars that are being transferred out to the other funds. On page 19, row 100, staff development licensed, an increase of $332,701. That is professional development, and it's associated with that new curriculum I just talked about. That's a lot of the training that's associated for our licensed staff for that new curriculum. That's why that number is elevated over the current year. Skipping forward several pages now to page 22. Row 215 is the school resource officer, up $517,819. Those are the three items that I mentioned earlier. The addition of the second co-responder unit, addition of a new one additional SRO, and a budget correction that was a miss from 22-23. And that takes us through the end of the non-FTE expenditures. Again, you can see on page 23 the totals at the bottom. In rows 287 through 295, those are the transfers of PPR and MLO dollars that are going to the charters. That's what those items represent. So you can see $23.6 million is transferred to the two charter schools combined for their portion of the PPR, per pupil revenue, and the MLO dollars that the district has. All of that we've talked about is general fund. I'm not going to repeat that process with all of the other funds, but I want to talk about those briefly here. So the general fund is not the only fund that the district maintains. There's another 10 funds or so, as you can see listed on page 24, which are very specific in their nature. That's why they're separate funds, because it's very specific activity that takes place in those funds. I won't talk about all of them, but nutrition services is one. So all of the activities within nutrition services are self-contained, almost like its own business, operating as a subsidiary, if you will. Our federal grants, our state grants are all reported separately. We talked about the bond redemption fund, we've talked about the building fund, capital projects. This just gives you all the funds that the district maintains and a brief description of what those funds are. Page 25 is an important slide, a good overview of all of the funds that we have that shows you our beginning fund balance, how much revenue do we anticipate for next year, what are the transfers in, which becomes revenue for those funds that are receiving the dollars, transfers out, which are an expenditure for those for that fund, the general fund. Those two should always equal, so transfers in should always equal transfers out, or vice versa. As you can see, the $3,163,368. Expenditures that are budgeted in each one of the funds, and then what the ending balance is in the reserve balance, and what the change for that particular year is. So on the general fund, the first one, far right column, you can see that $1,010,229. That's the same $1 million that we referenced on the summary slide in the front. All of the rest of the slides here are the details from a revenue and an expenditure standpoint for each one of those additional funds. Again, reported not by program code for all the other funds, but certainly broken down by the object codes that you can see in the columns across the top. Salaries, benefits, purchase services, supplies and materials, again, as dictated by CDE. So I'm not going to go through those, but some of them, the budget for a fund sits on one page, some it's multiple pages, like the federal programs. You can see each one of the federal programs, Head Start, IDEA, Medicaid, all of those programs that we have. State grants, state and local grants, the same way. The breadth of the number and types of funds that we have there, the expenses that are associated with them, and the expected revenue. So in the spirit of expecting some questions, I would choose to stop there with slide presentation and welcome any questions the board may have.
Can't remember where we left off. Stu, did you start?
I couldn't tell you.
Is Alexander?
I think it's me,
Okay.
but I don't have any questions.
You don't have any questions? Amy?
No, just want to say thank you. I mean, this is pretty impressive, and for somebody who's not very financially, I mean, you make it, I mean, I can follow it. I mean, so I just want to say, thank you very much for taking the time to explain this to us, and you're good at your job. And I feel lucky that we have you, so thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate those words.
Yeah.
I would certainly be remiss. This is not the Gordon Jones document. This is the Thompson School District document. Not just business services, but a lot of people in business services. But it involves every department. Every budget manager in the district has their input, their in a very good way, their fingerprints on the budget that they are expected to be held accountable to. They have to have that ability to provide some comments back. But the best thing you said there is, I'm somewhat of a non-financial person, and I actually understood a little bit of what you said.
Yeah, and the fact that, like, school finance is its own lovely creature. I mean, it's not just normal accounting or, regular, it's a specialty. So thank you very much for what you do for us.
Thank you for the words.
Yeah.
Ditto. I appreciate your humility as well, because herding cats is no easy task when it comes to this kind of work. And you do make it make sense to so many of us who have all these, all this input on this, right? This is a reflection of of the work that we do, and every time that we walk through the budget after that first few times that you walked me through it so thoroughly, my first year, I realized that everything that you told us was going to happen or somebody else presented to us is reflected here. And I think you're probably one of the most thorough people I've ever met, ever, anywhere, on anything.
Is that a compliment?
Yes. I mean, I can't imagine a better person doing this kind of work, because I can tell that you care about it or it wouldn't be this good. And I appreciate that you have a team of people who are doing that. So for everyone who worked late into the night last night and all the other nights before last night, it means a lot to me, and I am incredibly grateful for you.
Thank you.
Ditto. And I just think our finance team that you lead is such a great role model for the whole district, right? For all the staff and the students, because it's always transparent, it's accountable, there's integrity, there's full explanations, and you don't laugh when I ask a question, which I really appreciate a lot. You truly are one of those, there are no such thing as dumb question people, which I greatly appreciate. And honestly, the amount of time that when we got the email from you at 1 a.m., where I'm just like, oh my Lord. So thank you for this really deep, effort that all of you and your team, and thank your team for us too.
Thank you. There were extenuating circumstances that created that. So.
I'm sure there's a valid reason.
There's always. There's always reasons.
We all appreciate you and the dedication and time you put in, so thank you. Stu?
Ditto. I was particularly interested in preparing for this and looking at the variances. And the one question that stood out for me, and you addressed it on a later page, was variance regarding substitutes. It seemed like a $500,000 was a sizable amount of money, and I was kind of curious as to why there would be the increase, and you covered it both in your explanation and in here, so that takes care of my question.
I should mention that it wasn't, those positions were in place last year, but they weren't budgeted last year. So
Okay.
we added those after we were into the year and didn't adjust the budget. So those positions were in place, they just weren't fully budgeted for last year.
Okay, that explains the variance, and that's what I needed the explanation for. Thank you.
Nancy?
So I really love the information that you put in here. It really helps put it in perspective on all the salaries and benefits. I would also say that I think it's important to remember that the budget is a reflection of what your spending priorities are. And I still believe that the board should have a more collaborative approach, working with the superintendent to establish what the spending priorities are. And then also to your point when you've talked about, that each department, they come up with their own rationalization and what their priorities are. I think it would be helpful if, as the board, we could see what those were, so we could kind of ourselves and the public see how those tie back into the Strive 2025 plan. Things such as, like getting all third graders proficient. That I think would be really helpful, because at the end of the day, those of us that are elected, we're responsible to the voters for the money that's being spent, which is why I like to know where it's being spent. I also think that as we look at the priorities and the MLO, I will say that I've been contacted, and I know you guys have been too, about the teachers wanting to see about getting those previous years of experience recognized. I did some research, and I know Jeffco had done the same thing. They had done that. I think that's what people expect the MLO money to be used for, especially since for this coming year it's going to be over $34 million. The bulk of it is for compensation, not all of it, but the bulk of it.
Yes.
I would also say that on the safety and security, for the 2018 mill levy override, that is part of it. And I think we should look at what we're spending. I think what we did with the SROs by adding that sheriff and the new mental health provider from Summit goes a long ways with helping with that. But just to keep it in perspective, we're spending about 0.5% for safety and security when I take those numbers you give me. And so our number one priority is the education of kids, and right underneath that, or on par with it, is to keep the kids safe. And so I think, again, this goes back to our budget reflects our priorities, and I would like to see us next year make a real effort to really change some of the way the salary schedules are so we can get better paras, pay the teachers better and get them up to par. Even some little things like the performance management incentive, that thing has been around since, like, I think for me at least since 2011, and it's still at $150,000. We've never made it more. So it's there for the teachers to come up with great ideas and have them funded. So that to me is a great example of where we should increase amounts like that. But overall, I think that it's a good budget. I think we also need to keep in perspective, federal grants are down 38% and state is down 58%. And so we can't keep looking at the federal and state grants as some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because it's not guaranteed. And I think we can see that from the ESSER, because we're having to make it up now.
Yes.
So.
That's exactly what those big decreases are on the federal grants, is that fiscal cliff that we all hear about when ESSER dollars. Next year is the end of the ESSER dollars. And the amount spent each year has gotten smaller and smaller. So even though there are dollars available next year for ESSER, it's a much smaller amount than it has been in the past, which is contributing, just as you noted, that decrease in the federal programs. That's a big reason for that.
Other questions? Ben?
I had kind of two, I guess. So some of the things you were saying, Nancy, that I feel like those are board directed, not things that we would direct at staff. Those are board decisions we would have to make. Am I following you correctly? Like, our involvement in the budget and that sort of thing, that's not on board's shoulder, that's up to the board.
No, that's between us and Dr. Schaefer.
Well, to me, it would be board directed. Like, we would have to say, as a board, we want to do X, Y, and Z. So I just wanted to kind of clarify, like, what's board directed, what's staff directed, because those things really don't affect, like, the budget this year, like, like to direct those things at board. And those are on us, right? Those are on our shoulders. So I think that I just wanted to clarify that. Is that accurate?
Right, that actually supports my point that the board needs to be establishing what the budget priorities are.
Right, so it's board versus it's our task rather than excuse me, staff. And
So we'll do a committee next year to establish these priorities?
That would be a board vote, right? It's a board. That just needs to come before the board as a board decision, board vote, right? Mm-hmm. That's not a staff decision.
Right.
So that was just my first, I guess, clarification. And I guess my second one is, the whole federal and state decrease. I'm really glad we have Stu keeping track of things on CASB for us, because the state legislature, state legislators are really important to us, and we need to keep those lines of communication open, letting them know, as Stu does, through CASB and CASB does, what our challenges are. So it's just kind of, it's important things for keeping that on our radar. Because a lot of this is decision-making way above our, way above our pay grade, so to speak. Like, we just have to deal with it, or Gordon has to deal with those decreases, so that's all.
Okay, anybody else?
I do have one more thing. Since no one else said it, and this is about what you're presenting, I also really appreciate how, no, you give credit to everyone else where credit is due. You read our minds somehow, and you ask yourself, what are we gonna ask? Like, what are 8 of us at least gonna ask? And then you answer all that, and that's amazing. And somehow, there's always some questions that slip through, but I love that you somehow do that. And then the other thing that I really think is amazing, because I doubt that anyone else could do it, and we have other amazing staff that are a bunch of other amazing things, you can explain what everybody else's budget is doing through this immense amount of stuff. I mean, and if they had to sit up here first off, I guarantee, I mean, you're the only one who can laugh about it tonight, but I guarantee nobody else would be like, hey, Gordon's out tonight, I'll just step in. You are up here representing the entire district as one person, and I know that's a lot to ask, so thank you for doing that as well.
I did offer that opportunity to one of my team this afternoon.
I'm behind you though, I'm here for it.
Thank you.
If I could just translate that skill to my stock portfolio, that would be better.
We all have our own things. This is yours, so thank you.
Thank you.
I believe you have 2 more things? No? Is this all of it?
I'm sorry, the resolutions.
Yes.
If I could circle back to those. So there's 3 resolutions that you have in front of you as well. The first is the resolution of adoption of the budget, and that's all the budget, so all the funds, so this entire packet that you have. Hopefully the memo is fair, or the resolution is fairly self-explanatory of what's being adopted. The second item is the resolution of appropriation. That means the board is giving the district permission to spend the dollars that are appropriated. We cannot, by statute, expend more dollars than what the board has appropriated. So that's what the second resolution is. And the third one is the resolution of use of beginning fund balance. We can also not do that. You will see that some of the funds that you look at, where we talked about the $1 million add to the general fund reserves, there's some funds that show a negative, meaning we're drawing down that. It's totally normal with explanation. And if there's questions, I'm glad to address those. But some of it is carryover projects, like capital projects. Fund 43 is the perfect one. We had dollars budgeted in 22-23, but there's summer projects that won't be completed by June 30th. So we allow carryover of that reserve balance that was sitting in Fund 43 to be spent in 23-24, which then will cause more expenditures than revenue for that year. But you have to look at it in tandem with the prior year, that there was more revenue than expenditures, and it added to reserve balance. So that's what the third resolution is the resolution of use of beginning fund balance. And it's not for all funds. There's only, I think, 4, if I remember correctly, that's the case.
Okay, so for our next meeting, all of these things will come listed as separate items again.
I would recommend that all of these are part and parcel to the budget itself.
Okay.
So I would then bring forward the proposed budget document. We are not planning on making any changes to this absent board direction. So it would be the same document that would come forward, unless in our review over the next week or week and a half we happen to find something that is amiss. That the budget itself, the 41-page document, the proposed budget, and then the 3 resolutions all go together. So those can be, in my mind, one agenda item, but I would defer to Dr. Schaefer and...
We'll probably break it out as separate items. And then Gordon, can you please remind the board and the community about information input session?
Thank you for that. So we have scheduled for next Thursday evening, not tomorrow night, a week from tomorrow night, in this room, essentially the same presentation that I've just provided for the board, but an opportunity for community. If they have questions on the budget, I will touch on a lot of the same topics, but be available to answer any questions they may have as well.
Gordon, will that be offered remotely as well?
I don't believe so. I think we're going to do it just as an in-person. We did the remote last year, and I felt it, maybe just my personal feeling on it, it was very choppy trying to get community comments and feedback. My experience has been it's more beneficial in person, but I serve at the will of Dr. Schaefer, and he will direct me on what options could be available.
When is it, 6 o'clock? 6?
Is it a 6 o'clock start time?
6 o'clock next Thursday.
We'll promote it on our website and
Okay.
social media. So people
This document, the budget document, is also posted on our website for community review. It's under the financial transparency section, so if you go to the homepage, scroll all the way to the bottom, click on the financial transparency. It will take you to a finance page with several things on there. Click on the district budget, and it will show you our current budget, the prior year budget, and the proposed budget for next year, this same document.
Thank you.
Thank you, Board.
Very thorough. Thank you. All right. 5.2, future capital needs update.
It's always fun following Gordon. I feel like I should thank him, but.
I just did.
Is she getting it?
I'm trying to remember where it went.
There's there, you opened up the PowerPoint, you opened up the memo.
Just click on the.
Oh, this one below?
Yeah. Okay, good evening, Board. I'm Todd Pagoni, Chief Operations Officer, and tonight I also have.
Kristen Matigi, Director of Operations.
So we'll spend time tonight reviewing the future needs for the Thompson School District. Actually, part of our Strive 2025, this is called out as one of our goals for this year. So I just wanted to point out that this is actually, let's say, checking the box to complete for the school year. So it's exciting to have this and that we can complete one item on that. And I just want to briefly review the why behind this. So there is board policy behind the long-range master plan, why we developed the MPC, and then what the goal is behind this. So there's a lot of information in the presentation. All this has been the work really of staff and MPC over the year to review, ask questions, vet. And really the goal of tonight is to look at what are our needs really for the next 7 years, say to 2020, 2030. So that's the goal tonight, is to identify what are those high priority needs for the future, which also aligns with our master plan that we put together 3-4 years ago. So here's a snapshot of the buckets we'll be looking at. So as we started the work, there's 4 areas that we've divided into. So one is existing utilization and projected growth. So that's the demographics within the district. Capital needs, so what do we need to fix? Learning space enhancement, so there's, as part of the master plan document, there's actually a space enhancement. You know, what should our classrooms look like, and what are the goals for our schools to look like? And then again, safety and security, so what investments do we need to put towards safety and security? And as we started this work, staff looked at ranges. So you can see there's, within each bucket, there's a lower range that you know, we can complete the need, but it's going to be tougher. And then there's a higher range, which obviously would provide more. So within each bucket, that was the work we really dove into, was to look at what is our target, what is our true need in the next 7 years. So as we looked and dove into each bucket, the first one we looked at was projected growth. So there's 2 areas in the district that we've really got to focus on and analyze for growth needs. So one is in the northeast corner, which is the Kinston development area. It's really that whole Centera area. And then the growth that is developing in Berthoud. So there's a few Larger developments are already underway. There's a few projected that are going to start in probably in the next couple of years. And then what does that look like and what are the impacts in the next several years? So as we look at the Northeast, what we did was look at the two schools that really have an impact in this area, so Riverview and High Plains. So when you look at Riverview, that's the higher growth school between those two. It's projected, you'll see right now, to be full-ish in the 26 to 27 timeframe. You'll see the capacities right at 1,000. I put in there the capacity at 125%, that's with portables, so we actually have planned for portables out there, because when you look at adding schools, you really want to add when the schools are over capacity, not when they just hit capacity, because then obviously if they're under, we're not going to build a new school. So that's just for reference of what that looks like moving forward. But you can see up into the 27, 28, it starts getting to that capacity. High Plains, when you look at High Plains, we are finishing the addition by this August. That is the TIF project. The capacity of High Plains after this summer will be 750. 125% is about 937. So when you look at those two areas, and then you go to the next slide, and we looked and analyzed what are the big developments in that area, how much growth and students are those going to produce. It's about 300 students, so that's the 292 on the bottom. So that's both the Kinston area what they're projected to develop, and then the rest of Thompson River Ranch. So that's about the 300 students. So in essence, what we have is we have a total projected between those two schools at about 1675, and we have capacity at 7050. So what that looks like on the next slide is, what we analyze is we really don't have a need, in that 7-year-ish time frame. Well, what we do have, you'll see, is there might be, you'll see there's two large pockets of student population, so in the far north and then right around the Riverview area. So we have the capacity within the two schools. This is just the Riverview boundary. We may have to look at adjusting years down the road. Right now we're okay, but it doesn't say, oh, we have a capacity of 125% at each school for a new school. So as we looked at that, the recommendation and the thought was nothing for that area. As we move forward, I would say a little more of a challenging area that we know we're going to have to solve for an issue is Berthoud. So when you look at the growth of Berthoud, this is the development map. So for example, when you see number 5, that yellow circle is, we're working on a school site in Farmstead there. Where you see the number 1 on the upper left with the yellow circle, we have a school site already in the TBC area. And the 3 circles in the middle, that is IE, Berthoud, and Turner. As a note, the number 5, that development is Farmstead. It's about a third built out of 1,500 homes-ish. The larger development that's coming in is number 15 on the bottom left. That's the Ludlow farm development that's just now getting through the town trustees and looks like final approval. But that's again about another 1,500 homes. So two pretty substantial home developments. And just of note, the darker line on the outside, that really outlines all development in the near future. And if you have time, want to go research more, Berthoud actually shows their future development. There's not much that expands out past this as far as current approved. There's a lot of open land. So when we look at these two areas, and we look at historical, the growth that we've seen since 2016 to now, we've seen about 300 students come into the district out of that growth that was depicted on those last few slides. Moving forward, what I'll do is just go through where we're at with Berthoud and Ivy first. And I combine those because you'll see in a later slide that really all the students come from those two bounded areas, and what do we do is going to be part of the solutions down the road. But regardless, you can see the capacity of both those schools as they sit today is approximately 1,035. So in the 26 timeframe, they're already pushing towards their capacity limit. Turner is Right now, it's listed at a capacity of 630. We are going through and doing another evaluation. We've reviewed that the classrooms, a lot of classrooms in Turner are below what they should be, so they should be about 850 square feet for, say, 30 students. They're a little smaller than norm, so the capacity, instead of just counting the classroom and saying 30, we're taking into account, it'll probably decrease what that looks like for capacity. But regardless, you'll see that what it looks like is in the 28 timeframe, there'll also be a capacity, which is just a continuation of the kids moving forward.
Todd, is there
Yeah.
land right around Turner to expand Turner on?
There is, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll look at some of those options, but yes, there is. And then Berthoud High School, just want to note that this has a capacity of about 990, so there's nothing noted for a need there in the next approximately 7 years. So all that saying, what do we need? So we do need capacity in Berthoud. So we know we need approximately 350 seats in the Berthoud area. Our goal in this was to not say, here's an option, let's talk about the options. Our goal is really to say, here's the need, as we talk to NPC, and let's look at a few options. So there could be another possible option, when we talk to the community and we engage everyone to understand what we need. But here's two options that staff reviewed. Is option one is if we build a new school down there and then just did a small addition to Turner, that's one way to capture the need. When I say no work at Ivy and Berthoud, there's no other substantial work. So because of the cost of a new elementary and a small addition, that costs about $60 million between those two. So there's not much else besides some deferred maintenance to put towards those two schools. Option number two is to take the 3 existing schools and really increase their capacity, renovate and do additions to capture additional seats. So those are the two options that we want to look into, make sure at least one of those or both of those could solve it. But there could be another third option too as we look at the community of what else is out there. So to review those few options, actually before I go there, you can see in this slide here, this is also part of the challenge we are faced with is the density of the students are all within just, a very small area. When the blue line is actually 287, when you look west of there, those are all large estates, the larger home estates, so there's not much growth going to be happening there. North, it's already going into Cary Martin, so they're starting to take some already. But you can see the concentration, even with the 2 new developments, is just in that smaller area. So just to review what this could look like, there's a conceptual rendering of a new elementary school. Obviously, this is no way what one could look like, but we wanted to show, there's an option. This is what it could look like, but there's 20 different options out there for the community to look into. And then also floor plan. It depends on what the final site selection is, depends on how the floor, how the site lays out. But what we want to show is that this is, an option to solve some of the capacity issue we have in Berthoud.
Would that be a K-8 then?
No, K-5.
K-5,
Yep.
okay.
Yep. So the second option that we looked at, so these next 8 or 6, 7 slides are going to look at what if we invest the dollars in existing buildings. So what you'll see on the upper right, that's Turner as it sits today. We know with meeting with staff and talking with leadership students, there's already some issues with Turner. So the goal is one, to increase capacity. So it's about increased capacity 175. But then also it's a renovation of the existing building, so it would include AC, larger classrooms, and more of that educational enhancement that we talked about originally. So that's what that option is that addition and remodel. If you go to the next slide, this is what it could look like. So this is just showing, rendering of what an addition and remodel would do. So this is actually where that sign is that says Turner Middle. That would be the existing school, and then everything to the right you see is an addition. Looking at Berthoud L, Berthoud L actually is a little more prepared than Ivy, you'll see, because they actually have 2 spaces. So they have a gym and kind of a cafetorium. So what they need is just more classrooms. So this model shows adding about another 5 classrooms on, some reconfiguration of the inside or the front entry, and then again that AC work down there. So a rendering in the front of what it would look like would be that there. And then Ivy. On the next slide would be Ivy. One challenge with Ivy they currently have, even with today's capacity, is they only have one space, they only have one cafeteria space. So right now, they actually hold some of their lunch in a portable because they don't have enough rounds to push through the gym. So this solution says, okay, we keep what's there at a gym and then add the capacity. So it adds about 165 seats for Ivy. So in total, that added capacity is about 460. The other option adds a little more capacity because it's larger at the elementary level. And then just a rendering of what Ivy looked like. So that is just the one section, the first bucket of our needs. So to summarize, that's some couple different options. Both those options are about a $60 million tag. No matter which one it is, and there's could be an option in between, but that's about the two that we looked at that equal about that $60 million to capture that capacity that's needed down in Berkeley. So from here, I'll turn it over to Kristen. She'll talk about the capital needs that we reviewed with MPC.
Do you want to take the questions for both sections after the air conditioning presentation, or do you want the building-related questions now?
I say maybe we'll get through just this slide and then, or the 4 sections, the 4 buckets, and then have questions. That's okay.
Thanks.
Is that okay, Barb?
Absolutely. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our capital maintenance needs. I know this information's been presented in the past. It's been kind of updated, run through our master plan committee this year as well. So the data was compiled through detailed component and system analysis. We had architects and engineers help with that, as well as our very knowledgeable in-house staff, as they're the most familiar with that. So continuing to update that, as well as conditions do change daily, monthly basis as well. So you can see here at the bottom, we have that broken out essentially into 15 categories. We have our 1 through 5, which is the different types of needs. 1 that is our health, safety, compliance issues. 2 is impairs the functional use of the facility. So roof leaks might be one of those that impairs that functional capacity. 3, improve building usage for academic programs. 4, if it's not remedied in a timely manner, it'll incur additional damage or increased costs, and you can see that's a large portion of our dollars in there. And then 5 is reduces the quality of aesthetic value of the facility. On the left-hand side, you can see the priority, so then it's broken into 3 categories as far as priority: high, medium, and low. So high being those needs, in the next year, medium in the next 2 to 3 years, and then low, kind of that, 2 to 4 years, and then 5 to 7 years in that low priority. So things are assigned both a priority level as well as a score, so that we can really break that down, because when we're talking about thousands of line items across 30 plus sites, it's important that we're really kind of categorizing those to help us determine how we spend our general fund, that annual capital fund budget, as well as plan for the future. You can see up here in the pie chart that breaks out different classifications. So a couple standout items on there are electrical. That's that big blue section here. The kind of tan yellow over there is HVAC. And then asphalt is another big one, our parking lots, our play pads. We've made some improvements, and also there is a lot more to do. And roofing is another one of the larger sections within there. And you can see there's a number of ways that this is broken out. Each line item has a number of ways that we look at it, just so we can make sure we're addressing those needs across the district. Are there any questions on this piece? Or do we want to wait till questions till the end? Okay.
So safety security obviously is another bucket. So what we're looking at here is, although in the 2018 bond, we've gone through all the schools and done upgrades, and I would say 90% of them are to a standard. We still have some improvements to do when you look at Sarah Milner, I think it's Ivy, where they have, you walk in and there's still a cross flow, there's no actual vestibule out front. So we do have, I think, 7-ish schools that, although we made enhancements, there's still a secure vestibule, there's still some cross flow that's not to the upper standard. Like Bill Reed, that's going to take a large investment to help fix some of that. So that's what we looked at here, is really finishing that to make sure we've got all those covered. And then exterior doors, site safety, windows, there's still some physical pieces on the outside of the building that need to be done.
So this other bucket we have, learning space enhancement needs. We look at things that are broken, that need to be fixed, or are worn out and need to be replaced. We're looking at growth, capacity, we're looking at safety and security. And then there's this other piece of how are we continuing to update our schools. We have schools that are over 100 years old. Our average age is around 50 years old. And so that's another important piece of educational experience of our students and staff and community. So we underwent a process to identify kind of some suitability needs and looking at these learning space enhancements last year. Some examples of those that rose to the top: ADA access, intentionally designed educational spaces, safe pedestrian path to entrances, and kind of some innovation as well. So this graphic just kind of shows different stakeholders that were involved in that process, and this is really the start of that. It's making sure that we're capturing those needs, and also fine-tuning those further is important, and really listening to the individual school communities as well. Here's an example of one of those. So that intentionally designed spaces is so this is an ILC room at one of our schools, and staff have done a great job in addressing those needs as needs have changed over time. The use of space has changed over time, and this is not an ideal situation. So you can see the changing space is behind, if you look at the picture on the right, you can see that partition wall, and the changing space is right behind that. So it does provide privacy, but that's not the intentionally designed space that we would like to see. So this is just an example of meeting those needs, and there's more that needs to be done.
And this is, we want to provide just a snapshot. I know we have another topic just on air conditioning later, but this is just a snapshot and update of costs for what it would take to air condition our current schools. As we looked at needs, through the 4 different buckets, and as MPC went through the different needs, the challenge now is how do you narrow down what is the top need? So when you take air conditioning and then you combine it with the 4 other, how does that mix in? Where does that mix in? What I will say is, if you go to the next slide, as MPTC's done this work, we've narrowed down, and the goal is in the June 21st meeting, the chair and co-chair are actually going to present to say, okay, here's within these ranges, here's what we see as the need. So they've narrowed down to say, we don't want to put them in front of the board and say, here's all the data, present the data. But so the goal of today was to say, here's all the data with questions, and they were going to come next week or next board meeting and say, here's what we would suggest for a need within these 4 different ranges. I will say within these ranges, it's hard to capture the needs and then add air conditioning in. So that's just a continued conversation we'll have to have, is how do we strategically, plant some of these options in with keeping the bigger needs of the district in front of us, because as you can see, there's some significant needs, along with there comes, not saying air conditioning is need, but when you look at those 4 other areas, there is some significant needs there. So that's forecasting will be the 21st. They'll come through and we'll actually condense this and present together as far as what that number could look like.
Also, I'd like to acknowledge Chris Wright is here. He's our vice chair, so thanks so much for being here, Chris. The master plan committee is an amazing group of people, spend a lot of time, really get to know the information. So thanks for being here tonight, Chris, and we'll get to see you again in a few weeks.
Thanks for your. Learned a lot, didn't you? Okay.
And so before we finish, just one more slide. I was going to let Kristen update you on our portable plan.
Yes, so this was part of our master plan back in 2020, is continuing to look at our modulars, our usage, our condition, all of that, and continue to make recommendations around disposition of modulars. With ultimately the goal of not having them if we don't need them. Those aren't the ideal educational spaces that we want our students and staff in. So recommendation here is the removal of 3 modulars at Winona. That's sitting at a capacity of about 40%. We have an early childhood classroom there, and there's actually an early childhood classroom set up within the building that's not being used for students right now. There's also a vacant modular, and then one that was being looked at for a community center that can also be accommodated within the building. Another piece is there will be a removal of 2 modulars at High Plains as part of that, as the plan really is, as we put additions on buildings, that capacity is no longer needed, so removing those so they don't get used as, you know, storage. It's continual maintenance, it's continual utilities. And then also kind of looking forward as we look at condition, removal of 1 modular at Lorraine Edmondson Elementary next year. And then, of course, continuing to monitor this. There are times that we need to put modulars at buildings, but just making sure we're keeping track of where we are. So in the since 2020, we had 32 modulars. We've removed 9 and found better spaces within our schools to accommodate needs.
So here's our next steps. Obviously, that's a lot of information. MPC is going to make a recommendation for a need amount, and then we need to gather more feedback. You know, this is a lot of work by committee. You know, there's some community work that we've done already to this point, but now we need to get, you know, into the school communities. So it's going to be diving into school communities to understand the specific needs, you know, as we look through the needs that we've developed. So that's our next steps. Throughout the next year, school year, we'll come back and update the board on that progress and how it's going, because it's going to be a lot of work for, you know, staff to go through and night meetings and identify needs and talk to the community about what is truly needed, so we can gain the trust, one, for the 2018 bond, to understand, you know, communicate on that and what we have done, but then let the community know too that we know we're not done and there are more needs out there. So that's the work we'll dive into next year, you know, especially in some areas that is higher impact, like Bertha. You know, there's some complexities with both those options, and how do we navigate through that, and what is a recommendation at the end of the best option that the community, in the end, we need the community to get behind, and obviously the board, but the community get behind our plans to, I'll say, scratch these needs we have in front of us. So that is it for that. I'll stop and answer any questions.
We'll start with. No? Done?
Awesome. So much work in this. The only thing that I would say that struck me as I walked through all of this, and even as you explained it more, I was like, oh, I better write them down, is that when I think learning space enhancements, I know how important that is, even with the furniture refreshes that we did. Like, that was a big deal, and it makes a huge difference. So I'm not minimizing that in the way that I thought of it. But it was really easy for me to prioritize that very low because that seems aesthetic. And when I actually started to hear more of what was in that category, I would argue that much of that is actually safety or risk, in that, you know, anything that's ADA and walking path has a real big security piece to it, and then even the lack of changing rooms, that's definitely something that people have wanted to talk to us about. So I just wanted to put that out there for if anybody else looked at that the way I did and went, oh yeah, well, that seems like an easy thing for us to ignore for a lot longer, given that this is a long list and a lot of things. The second I started unpacking that, I realized that we can't minimize that either. So thank you. I appreciate it.
I don't really have any questions, I just appreciate you focusing us on the future and looking forward. We always have to be thinking ahead, right? And you guys are excellent about reminding us of everything that we're gonna be needing to tackle in the coming years. So thanks for laying that out very clearly.
Lots to think about and causes a little anxiety on my part when we think about an election in the next couple of years too. So, but thank you. Stu?
I do have several questions, and if you want me to just ask one or two, and then we can go back around, I can ask the rest
Just
of
do
them.
one or
So
two to start.
You can decide. MPC actually saw this presentation Monday night, and so in addition to having had the opportunity to look at it on my computer, I also heard the explanation and heard the questions that were asked Monday night. I have 3 or 4 additional ones, and you don't have to bring up the slide. I can just tell you what I noticed. Regarding the current capacity of Turner, you have that listed as 630 to 670. Even the high projection for 2028 is 611. So the reason for suggesting a remodel of Turner is not really due to a need for more space. It's to change the learning environment.
There will be a need for space. So what we're going through now is evaluating Turner in detail. So my assumption is going to be when we get all the numbers and actual capacity, the number at Turner probably is going to go down to the high 500s for truly what the capacity is. So it's 2 things. One is to add needed capacity, because by 2030, you imagine you have another 30 or 40, 50, 60 kids on top of those numbers. So it's capacity need. Plus also, then there's an opportunity to fix some of the classrooms that don't have the proper space.
I was making my comment on the basis of the figure that was presented on the slide, which was 611 in 2028. I have a question too about the term 21st century elementary school. Is 21st century elementary school, is that a design concept term, or is that just like an adjective saying this would be an elementary school built for the 21st century?
That's, when you talk to designers and architects, that's really how they would describe the building. So it's taken the latest of today into the building.
So basically a 21st century design would be what we as a district would decide a 21st century design is. It's not a design concept.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Do you want to go back or
We'll just check
to
with
other
the
people and then
Nancy.
I'll come back to me?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so the elementary schools in Turner and Berthoud, they are or aren't going to be at 125% in 2028 or 2030?
They will be getting there, So in 26, they're going to be at capacity. So by the 28 to 30, they'll be over the. So they'll be well over the 100% into the 125%.
Okay, because I know on the Kinston, you said that we're not looking at a school because it's not going to be at 125%. So is it just kind of like trying to figure out where to draw that line?
So the difference is when you look at Berthoud and Ivy, if we pull up those slides. When you look at Berthoud and Ivy, by 26 they'll be at capacity, so both of them together. By the 28, they're probably going to be towards 125%, and then we're looking at another 2 years past that, so they'll be over the 125%. When you look at the High Plains, Riverview projections between those two, even at 2030, projecting the students that are out, they're not going to hit that 125%. They'll be at about the 100%. So they'll be filling up, yes, and that's why. As it's looking there, everything again, this is a model, and we got to model all this forward. But Riverview is going to be pretty full, at and over capacity, and then High Plains is going to be under. So there's going to have to be some sort of shift to capture all the students in that upper corner of the district.
Alexander?
This is all very interesting and definitely a little overwhelming to think about all the many needs. I just have a sort of a silly question, is when you take the modulars away, where do they go? Are they stored somewhere, or are they sold, or are they, what happens to them? Are they destroyed? I don't know.
Yeah, so it depends on condition. So generally, they end up being demolished.
Okay.
So that would be the disposition of these 3 modulars, is based on condition. We have sold a couple as well. That was from Thompson Valley. It's a fairly low dollar amount. But if they can be reused, we certainly would want to reuse them. So we're taking out what we can. We're even taking out some ceiling tiles, looking at those pieces to be responsible with the resources that we have. These would be demolished.
Thank you, it's a lot.
Don? Yeah? Stu?
Okay. The $60 million estimate that you've presented for options 1 and 2, and perhaps if there's an option 3, does that include air conditioning? Is that part of the amount for the Berthoud schools?
So in option 2, Ivy, Berthoud, Turner includes it, yes, not
Okay.
for the high.
You were right.
Yeah, in option 1, it does not include it. In any of the 3, just the new school, obviously.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what the answer to that.
Yeah. And my next question may not be for Todd. My next question may be for Dr. Schaefer. Assuming whenever we make a decision about going forward with a bond issue, when will the items on that bond issue be decided?
So,
How far in advance of the bond issue?
well, it would have to be in advance of the bond issue so that we know the dollar amount that we would set.
Right.
So after MPC will present to the board on the 21st. Following that, we will be engaging community. So educating the community, sharing similar information, getting feedback and input from the community. And then based on feedback and input from the Board of Education, from community, from staff, what we will do is then present a recommendation/proposal to the Board of Education. And all of this, again, would be in advance of going for a bond. Basically, if the board decides that we have interest in a bond issue, let's just say it's 2024, for example, we would have to set a dollar amount. So these different buckets cost money. So we heard like the 60 million, okay. So there was a slide that Kristen shared on prioritization, the high, medium, and low. We would absolutely, my guess is we would absolutely recommend high. We'd probably take a run at the medium as well. Saying high and medium, there's a lot of line items under each one, and we would spell out, every single one. What's also interesting, we meet almost 2 weeks on this as staff to just really discuss an update. With every day and month that passes, priority lists continue to increase because, as you know, things age, get older, break down, heaters, boilers, roofs, all of that.
And prices go up.
All of it. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but I think we will settle on a needs and then put a cost to that. If there's contingency, there's other inflationary costs, or so. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's all part of the calculus.
Yeah, not exactly. Okay. So let's say that the bond issue, I'm just throwing out a month, let's say it would be June of '24. So at what point would the items on that bond issue be decided?
Yeah.
How many months in advance?
So
that was really my question.
If you work backwards from November 24, say that is the date, the board would have to vote on going forward in the August timeframe of 24. So we would get the needs list done really by this time next year.
Okay, that answers my question.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, no, that's. I probably didn't ask it specifically. And Barb, I do have one more question or point, but I'm going to wait until we get to the end of the meeting and talk about topics for future meetings.
Okay.
Okay?
All right. Are we done? Questions?
So on this bond issue, so the money to do Ivy and Berthoud and Turner, if we did this in June of '24, we would start the construction sometime in, what, 25, or probably 26?
The goal would be to start in '25. When you look at the numbers and the needs, we would have to, obviously we'd want to get it open in the 26, 27, it would be goal. There's a lot of complexities to that. To do that, we'd probably start design even before, let's say 24 is the magic, the example date to go. We'd probably start a little pre-work before, just to understand what it takes to get to a 26, 27 opening.
Okay, and then the last
Turner
question.
after that, sorry.
The last question, again, it goes back to what I was asking about the MLO, in that we just have a lot of ongoing maintenance needs, and to your point, because our buildings are 50 years on average. So is there a way where we can request a mill levy override, but it's really narrow and specific to only HVAC, roof, those big maintenance, instead of always having to postpone them and Band-Aid them and then wait till we can do another bond, and by then it's going to cost more because now the roof is gone really bad. And that's what I was trying to ask it here, not so much about the 2018, because I know that's already got specific language, but can we start looking at, and I don't know what the rules are on that, but if we could do that, then maybe it's kind of like always having it.
Yeah, so I know Gordon and I did talk about it. There are some options out there that next year we can explore looking at. I'm not the CFO to get into mill rates, where we're at and our capacity, but there is another type of mill out there that could help just specific maintenance.
It's just really narrow and restricted.
It
to
is, so
just-
it would provide an income stream ongoing specific to the needs that you saw, the maintenance needs you saw.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Okay, thank you. We have on our agenda district-wide air conditioning update, and we also have Grace Upon Grace. And they've been sitting here. Would we dare do them now at this point? And then can we postpone them? I don't think we should, but that's my impression. You mean the district air conditioning? The conversation.
Yeah,
Oh, no, I don't want to postpone Grace Upon Grace. I want to know if we can postpone the air conditioning so that we can do the great, they've been sitting here waiting patiently.
Well, I think we can probably handle both if the board is a little flexible to go a little after 8 o'clock. I mean, I don't want to rush conversation, but given that we won't have another business working session
Right.
until August, why don't we can do these.
Okay.
We're prepared and it's up to the board.
I was looking at the 60 minutes
Oh.
and thinking,
So I think the time is generous, and we'll ask Todd to provide an expedited presentation, but give you plenty of time to ask questions if you have. Let's roll.
are you still okay sticking around a few minutes longer? I know you have a babysitter.
Would you like to switch the two?
Should we do
Yes,
Grace
I would like to do
Upon
that.
Yeah, let's do
Yes.
Grace Upon Grace first,
Yes.
if that's okay with you.
My parents are still alive, so they're the kids for right now.
Yeah, but there's 3.
I was going to ask the nugget score, because something like that.
That's very close.
It's very close. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it's very close.
Okay.
51 to 40, 53 to 48 nuggets.
Okay.
All right, so we'll get going. So, again, thank you for having us. We will go through the pilot program that we went into last year. So I will have Kristen walk through this presentation.
We're doing Grace Upon Grace. Kate?
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Yep.
Flipping a minute, so flipping.
Well, thank you for inviting us back to present on the pilot program and the Grace Upon Grace partnership. So just touching on the Strive 2025 connection to start. 1.1, providing access to period products eliminates this as a potential barrier to student achievement. 2.4, ensuring facilities are welcoming and safe, so providing access to period products meets the need for students. want to ground this conversation also in our equity framework and the connection to that. So you can see there's a little arrow on the left looking at the equitable resource allocation. That's really where this ties in. So that's looking at allocating district funds, time, equipment, and FTE equitably to ensure access to educational programs and activities. And by providing period products, that's providing those resources to students who need them. A little bit of background. This was shared last time when I talked about the pilot program back in August, September, the fall. So period poverty is a real concern that's seen across the nation. This is some information from some nationwide studies. I don't necessarily want to go through all that. I know we're trying to do it expedited. So the COVID-19 pandemic also exacerbated some of this. And we've also seen fellow school districts addressing these concerns. So the Grace Upon Grace pilot program, Grace Upon Grace is a local nonprofit, and want to acknowledge Emily Jorgensen, who's here. Their mission is to provide individuals in our community with diapers, wipes, and period products to live and grow with grace and dignity. So Emily's been a big champion of this, looking at how to support our students, and that's really that primary goal. So in the 21-22 school year, we partnered with them looking at providing period products in our health offices. And then this past school year, Grace Upon Grace funded a pilot program in 4 of our secondary schools. And the dispensers and supplies were planned for 1 semester, and that actually stretched over the entire year, and we also have products coming into the next year, which is exciting, and that's really part of the point of a pilot program, is so that we can look at what is right-sizing these needs, and so we can provide a little bit more of a honed-in budget as we look at expansion of that. So we put out a program check-in survey with the 4 secondary schools that we piloted this program at. When we started that program, we met with some core people at each of those groups. So a building administrator, a shower, nurse, and then as well as the custodian, as our custodial staff are the ones that are stocking that and taking care of that piece. So sent this survey out to those point people at the schools. And also ask for others who may have been involved to provide feedback as well. So just kind of want to highlight recommendations as well as benefits and challenges, as there are certainly both. Across the board, we had 9 responses, so it's a small size, and also it was only 4 schools. So we did get responses from each of those, and also just anecdotally talk to staff as well. And across the board, yes, this program was recommended by that's administrators, that's showers and nurses, as well as custodial staff. There's one in there that recommended maybe only looking at high school level, as middle school students struggle to be responsible, and that's perspective of one person in that respondent. So, but still recommended the program. So benefits, that was an open-ended question. These are some of the responses. Last time in the hallways, the products are easily accessible. It's not embarrassing to have to go to the health office and ask. Less stigma, more students staying in class, not going to the nurse. Students were thanking staff for the products, and it's helpful for students when they struggle with affordability or just forget. Challenges, vandalism and waste. And I don't want to minimize that piece on here, because we did experience that across the schools. I just also want to note that we experienced vandalism and waste of bathroom products across all our schools. We had bathrooms shut down at schools that weren't part of this pilot program. So there's that certainly is a challenge and something to continue to track, and we see it across the board, unfortunately. So looking at kind of options and cost. So options, we can look at just middle school, we can look at high school only, or we can look at all secondary. And I guess when I say middle school only, that also includes PK. Or we can discontinue. So those are kind of those options. This is an approximate annual cost as the pilot program. We, still have products available for the upcoming year. There's also different options of products, so these are just kind of a rough ballpark. And in looking at this, it's really a drop in the bucket as far as when we look at even just our custodial supplies. So just kind of keeping that into perspective as well. And Grace Fund Grace has been willing to donate the dispensers. So they donated the dispensers and all the products for the pilot program and have agreed to donate dispensers for all of the schools, all of the bathrooms, which is actually quite a large dollar amount because they're nice dispensers. They're solid, they can lock. So this would be something that we would, the proposal is to take this forward as a school district, as one of our priorities. I'm not looking for approval. It's really kind of circling back on the pilot program and sharing this information. And then,
I would just say on that, we have included that in our facilities budget, so the recommended 13,000 is already included in our facilities budget.
And so for clarification, unless the board directs us not to do this, it is our intention to do this. It's already, it's in the budget, so certainly the board would have the final say, but we're not bringing this forward to a vote unless you're directing us not to do it.
And just a little bit of additional information as we do want to continue to look at additional opportunities. Senate Bill 21-255, this is one that's available. I brought it up last time as well. I reached out. They are planning to continue it. It's pretty limited in the funds that are available, and only 2 of our schools would qualify. It's something certainly we can look into. It's just raising awareness that there are other opportunities and pretty good. Questions?
So let's start, I think we're done.
Yeah.
Question?
So this is amazing. And I've heard several stories of how important this is. Across the entire lifespan, this is not just because we did this pilot and solicited feedback, but this is a real thing for anyone who's ever experienced this themselves. And I'm really grateful for Emily to take her own experience and turn it into something that is benefiting all of us. So thank you very, very much. And I hate to do this, but this is what I do, so I'm gonna do it. It's not enough. Not even close. So I'm so grateful we're doing this, and I don't wanna at all minimize the amazing work that's happening, because we wouldn't be sitting here if it wasn't for some people being really gracious in their care for other people. And we know that we are trying to support students across a lifespan that doesn't just start conveniently when you go to a middle school. And so I think that we can't just celebrate the amazing things that we're doing here, although we should absolutely do that. We also need to be planning for solving the real challenge of having up to 80% of our students impacted by missing classes and education, since that is what we're here for. So, thank you very, very much. And thank you also for letting me be the gas pedal on us keeping kids in class and helping them have dignity.
Ditto, I'm really excited to see this expanded to all secondary schools, but I do think we need to start talking about elementary schools. As we know, more and more students are starting menstruation earlier and earlier. It's just the way of the world, and there's nothing probably more terrifying than for a 4th or 5th grader to have that happen at school and of course they're going to be unprepared. So I would really like us to talk about getting the products into the elementary schools as our next step. So I guess ditto to Dawn. I don't have any questions for you guys. I do have some questions on Nancy's request for information, so I don't know, because I just wanted to kind of understand some of your questions, so I don't know if we should take that later or now, because I don't have any questions about the presentation.
We can talk
That's clear.
offline if you like, so that these people don't.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm always happy to talk with you offline so that they don't have to stay longer.
I'm so sorry, I can't hear you. I get my hearing aids tomorrow. My disability will be fixed.
I was saying, we can talk about it offline if you like, so that they don't have to stay here later. I mean, it's all in here.
Well, I guess there's just a really couple of important questions
Go ahead.
that I have about your questions, because I'm just trying to seek to, norm number 5, I'm trying to seek to understand. So is that okay if I ask a question or so? Okay. So you asked about when young women graduate and find jobs and discover their employer isn't going to take care of them, then what? And then how is providing personal hygiene items, teaching responsibility and accountability. So to me, those two things are kind of similar. And I guess I'm just not understanding where that's coming from, since we provide things like school lunches or backpacks of school supplies. I'm just trying to figure out what the difference is to helping our kids succeed in providing period products versus lunch or school supplies. I guess that's where my confusion comes.
The confusion on what, teaching accountability and responsibility, or?
Well, I mean, we give them breakfast and lunch, so are we, I guess if you don't think we should give them period products, does that expand, to lunch, breakfast, and school supplies?
I think that's a bit of the gaslighting kind of stuff.
No, I'm serious, because it's all about responsibility, so I'm just trying to understand where you're seeking to understand.
Well, it's not like someone can bring, they can bring a sack lunch, but this is different. And I'm not willing to get into the argument or discussion with you right now.
Okay. I guess I see that this is such an important part of Strive 2025. It supports it. It increases attendance. It lowers barriers to student achievement. And so I worry if we were not to do this program, we would actually be, I guess, discriminating against students who do menstruate. And so that's the other piece of the puzzle I'm trying to figure out is...
Discriminate against people who okay. This is not discrimination. There's nothing wrong with saying we don't need to provide menstrual products. They have parents.
Not everyone does.
Again, I'm not certain that you guys are wanting this conversation with me to really have an understanding of where I'm coming from, or you would just like to just have this come out and make an issue of it. Because there's a big difference between the two.
I'm just trying to understand the objections.
I don't believe so.
That's how we converse, though. That's how we try to.
I'm not suggesting that we don't do this, but there's nothing wrong with me raising these questions.
I'm going to move this on.
Okay.
Thank you, Barb.
I'm just going to say I'm 100% behind the
I have a question that may seem unrelated, but it really isn't. When a student needs to go to the nurse's office and needs a Band-Aid, or somebody's injured in PE and needs antiseptic or whatever, do the schools provide those kinds of things at no charge for students? I thought so. So where I'm going with this is, isn't this another healthcare need, just like being injured, getting a cut, maybe even having something more serious that the school has supplies to take care of and the child isn't charged for it? And so for me, it seems like it's all part of the same domain. And that was why I wanted clarification, because I didn't think if a kid needed a Band-Aid or a piece of gauze or something like that, that the child was charged for it. That's the purpose of my question.
Nancy? No. Alexander or Amy? I don't mean to put the two of you necessarily together. At the same table. Just
No, I mean, I'm, yeah, 100% supportive. I mean, our
Okay.
main goal is to eliminate barriers, and
All right.
this is definitely it, so.
Thank you.
Good job, and thank you for your service. Thank you.
Thanks for hanging in there.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, now we
So
can.
we'll move on. Yeah, so as we presented the board last year, I think it was around this time, we'd come back to the board with updates and options and discuss air conditioning throughout the district. So we will go through what that looks like, and then we'll talk about what some possibilities are.
So just looking at our STRIDE 2025 connection, 1.2, identifying favorite options which improve student attention and learning, and 4.2, ensuring prioritization of capital and human resources. So gathering the data to prioritize those resources. Keep going. There's the summary. Starting here with the district comparison, this has been same information you've seen before. So just looking at what other school districts have as far as air-conditioned buildings. Some are at 100%. We can see Pooter at about 50%, and most of the other ones up there.
Kristen, are we at about 50% too? If we were on that list, would we be about 50%? Okay.
Yes. Next slide. Thank you, Steve.
No preview?
Exactly 50.
So it's kind of exciting.
I actually did look at this. I'm sorry.
So this is actually up since last time that you saw it, because we have Peak View. Sorry. Peak View's on there as well, and also did take off some other ones. So the overall school buildings are different, taking off Monroe and Mary Blair and Monroe Child. But anyway, this looks at fully cooled, partially classroom cooled, and the focus really here is classrooms, or limited or no cooling in our classrooms. Current conditions, so this again is information that you've seen before, with the exception of that last little chart at the bottom, which looks at those hot days over this past school year as well. So I believe it's the same number of days as last year as well, just a little bit different distribution. Here's a recap on the pilot study that was done with those residential cooling units. So again, just revisiting that, we did kind of test that out. We did see some reductions, but pretty minimal. And so really focusing on investing in more permanent solutions for our schools. Just looking at disadvantages, staff time, electrical costs, replacement cycle. They don't last that long. So just that overall recommendation of not the solution that we should be putting a lot of money into. So there are multiple options and steps. With portable units, not recommended. We can just jump right into that $104 to $6 million. We can look at installing by school or installing by area of the building. So that's that. 104, and actually there's a discrepancy doing two presentations in the same night. I didn't update the chart in the right amount of time. So on here, this is the updated information. Centennial Elementary is a lower number on here. I just want to call that out of, I realized having the same chart and I updated this one. So
It's okay.
yeah. All right, so options: cooling by area or student population. So we can cool by area based on infrastructure readiness. So as we've moved through with bond work and other programs, primarily bond work, I think there were some ESSER funds in there as well, we have installed new ventilation units, so new unit vents at some schools. And so in some of those, we also made them cooling ready, didn't have the funds to actually cool, but kind of getting us one step closer. Or we can look at cool by area based on student population. So those most vulnerable are our youngest students, as well as exceptional student services. So cooling by infrastructure readiness, 2 schools that are more ready based on new unit ventilators. Carey Martin Elementary, this is the building that is not cooled in classrooms. You can see on there just in the computer lab. And so because we have invested already in new unit ventilators, that estimated cost of about $1.2 million to kind of do the rest of the classrooms. It's not actually a full school because there's also additional areas, but it is the classrooms. So, and then Centennial, so that is partially cooled. There's an addition on there that is cooled. We have new unit ventilators. It already has a chiller. It's adding the piping around there to actually connect those, the original part of the building. So that would cool the whole building. And then also looking at cooling by student population and priority area. So this is a similar chart with some updated costs on there that we've seen before. And so really focusing on some of our ESS classrooms, so ILC, students who are more medically fragile, they are not able to regulate temperature as well. So that's a focus area as well as our youngest students. Again, they're not able to regulate their temperature as well as someone who is older.
So here's some recommendations and next steps. So, something we've already been doing, as Kristen mentioned, is as we're going into the schools, getting the schools more prepared for a larger cooling option. The second one is, as budgets may allow us, tackle some of the high priority areas. When I say some of the challenges, we don't currently have money set aside for an option. So if you go back a slide, there's some options that are lower in dollar amount that are very space specific. We still don't have dollars allocated towards that. So within our capital funds, within our general fund, we didn't allocate air conditioning as part of that. So the solution, is obviously more of a reserve fund. If there was an option by the board or the board so wanted to tackle some of this, it would be going into the reserve fund for how we would budget and then fund these options. So a lot of good information, a lot of options out there. There's just that one option out there as far as budget and how we actually tackle it that, we don't have that. Last time when we came forward, we had a budget surplus, so we recommended some of that coming out of it. So that was, we had an opportunity then, we just don't have that now, as there's no surplus, so this would be more of a reserve option to go into.
So 2 things I would just extend a little bit before the board might have some questions or comments. One is just a reminder, Bill Reed Middle School, the 3rd floor will be taken on this summer. Remember, we had approved it, but due to a delay in receiving materials and labor and other costs, it will be happening this year. We will have maybe additional resources coming online through bond contingency funds. I'm not saying that we would recommend the use of that, I'm just saying that those will be funds available around next year at this time. Todd is listening very carefully and I'm going to free that up, but we probably by mid-year, we might be able to be better predictive in terms of how much we would have in contingency or unused expenses or funds, resources available from the 2018 bond. We have historically outperformed the budget, and as Gordon presented, it's a pretty tight budget right now. When you look at it, about 0.5% right now is what the quote-unquote cushion is, and we have a lot of unforeseen expenditures, and so we would not recommend going to that right now. If the board, we do have reserves. We're not recommending going into reserves. But that's an option, certainly. But I just want the board just to be aware, at this time, we don't, unlike the last time we came to you and said we did have a pool of money available, we don't have that money. We wouldn't recommend accessing any money at this time for air cooling. So that's what I just wanted to share.
Pam, I think you can start us. I think you're right. It's like, this is just a lot to digest, quite honestly. It's a huge topic. It's been a huge topic for a long time. I appreciate you guys keeping us surprised and we'll keep it in our front brain there, yeah, that's all.
You know, I'm thinking about this as, okay, so we put it off, but we know that to get to that big pot will be almost impossible. So in my mind, I'm thinking maybe we need to start chipping away at it in the places that we can put it in. And then when we do go for the bond, we build in some air conditioning money to kind of level it out to, but if we just keep waiting on it and waiting on it, we're not ever gonna get to it. And so if we're gonna do it, just pick a piece, do it, and then next time there's another little pot, pick a piece and do it until we can relieve some of the pressure for those little kids that, I mean, when you see them coming from recess or sitting their desk and their eyes are going, and you know they're just warming the seat. They're not getting anything out of their learning whatsoever. So anyway, that's my thought. Stu.
You said what I think, so I don't have anything to add to that.
On the, I appreciate you don't want to get into reserves, but my question is, I mean, do we have the capacity within reserves? And I think, if I could read that, I think it said was it 6.8 million it said? And that would, there's a lot of elementary schools on there that would, I mean, I know we're trying to save the reserves for a rainy day, but this would go a long ways towards helping with the elementary schools, and to Barb's point, so that those kids would actually be in an environment where they were open and receptive to learning. So, you know, I realize I'm probably the only one, but I would probably advocate for like, let's just get it done.
Well, and real quick to clarify, this 6.8, that wouldn't cool all the elementaries.
No, I know,
Okay,
it would just
okay.
be the ones on this list.
Well, no, it would just be
Small
portions,
portions.
it would be the priority
But
classroom.
it's, at least it's a start.
Yeah, I just didn't want you to think 6.6 would.
No, I mean, this is all we've been
It's on one
talking
building.
about since I've been on the board.
Alexander?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that sort of stood out to me is the last time we talked about it, it was 80 million and now it's 104 million. So in a year, it's gone up $25 million. So the longer we put it off, I mean, if it goes up $25 million every year, that's gonna, you know, I don't know. I feel like, I mean, there has to be, like, sort of to Barb's point and to Nancy's point, I mean, I think if it's something we want to try to chip away at somehow, it's not gonna get better.
It's not gonna get better.
Yeah, and it's not gonna get
It's
cooler.
yeah,
It's not
it's
gonna
not gonna get.
Although you would wonder right now. So I don't know, but it's a little disheartening.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
Amy?
I mean, yeah, I don't know, do we start chipping away now, but I'm with you on the, you know, bond.
I mean,
So,
No, we have to.
I'd sort of like to see how the Bill Reed thing pans out, you know? I mean, I know that'll be a ways away before we know, but like, does cooling one floor of a building actually help? You know, or is just cooling particular areas, like, is it worth it to cool areas, or does that not even really accomplish much of anything? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and I would say just from experience, this has to be tackled in bigger, small bites. So when I say that, it's,
Yeah.
it's gonna be challenging to even take floor by floor. That's not economical, that's not, you know, the right way to approach it. Just seeing how other districts have done this before, it is just a bigger, small, so the next bite maybe is 10 million, so we get 3 more schools. Then unfortunately, it might take another 10 years to get 5, 10 more schools, but, you know, unless there's a large investment at once, which typically doesn't happen, it's just a continual next priority, just a smaller, bigger chunk, you know, so we can take, say maybe the next priority is just 3 elementary schools, you know, we just finish 3 more, and then the next is take 4 or 5, so it's just continuing to make it a priority when we do have the opportunity for those bigger chunks of monies, to say, okay, we'll take 10 million and do these, and then unfortunately, the 10 millions aren't there every year, but it's gonna be that next, say, 5 to 8 years maybe that you take another 10 to 15. That's how I mean, to frame it, I think that's the framework and the, conceptually to look at it of how we can actually tackle it. Because it would be hard taking floor by floor, because what we're not doing then is creating a true system of building air conditioning, where we can monitor tonight, we can do the corridors, you know, all the offices, you know, all the spaces into where the air, like what we're doing, Bill, will suffice, you know, I mean, it'll help, but it's not gonna be a long-term solution either, because it's not a solution that's gonna be a 50-year solution that's, you know, sustained.
Would do the Carey Martin and Centennial, would that finish, those schools would then be 100%
Correct.
air conditioned?
Nearly. Carey Martin isn't quite 100%. That's looking at classrooms. Or are you looking
sorry.
at, which list are you looking at?
The other one.
Just those with the 2 on
The
there?
one with just the 2 on it?
Yep. Yeah, Centennial does finish the school, Carey Martin, basically, very close.
I think it's hard, it's challenging, because that's a huge thing that we hear from parents every, you know, August, September. And I get it, I mean, it's a health and safety and all of that, it's education, it's, you know, learning environment. And, but I don't, it's challenging.
I think it's more strategic than we've done. I mean, I think chipping away at it, keeping it as a thing that we do this with, and talking about the big strategy. I think we have to do both because it's a need that's persistent, but it's also much too big to ever solve it by chipping away at it. So I thank you for keeping it in front of us the way that you have, because that's, you know, I don't know that we have anything that's in front of us that's gonna solve this without a long-term plan, a very big long-term plan. And as you separated this out because it needed its time and space, there's also a lot of other stuff that you presented that is high priority too, that's a much bigger price tag. So this is why they pay us the very big bucks to try to solve this, but ultimately I think we have to come at it strategically.
Think of a question. I know there's never been appetite across the state to start later, like after Labor Day, let's say. But it's like every school district is facing this issue. Like, is there any conversation at CASE or anything like that would help solve a lot of the school district's problems if we started a couple weeks later?
So interestingly, as you saw that first list of school districts, a lot of them have air conditioning, so it's a non-starter.
So it's kind of, they're just never gonna go for the later start.
So they would be like, why? You know,
Yeah.
That's how.
So Thompson School District's dealing with a difficult situation yet again.
I'll ask, I'm sorry. So my favorite question to ask, I do every year, it's like, where would you like us to go with this? Because this is a yearly conversation. In some years, we've taken deliberate, specific action. So I need to kind of sort of know the will of the board, because we will give these yearly updates, but keep in mind, like this, it will be next May or June when we bring this forward to you again, unless the board would like to tackle further conversations. We are at the time of the year where we'll get feedback in August and September from staff and parents and kids, and then come October we won't, and then it'll, but again, I need just some direction or what you're all thinking in terms of how much more do you know? Because you're right, we have reserves. Gordon will tell you we can do anything, the board would like, within reason, of course, but it's, right, I know. Yeah, but it's, if we do this, then what are we not gonna do?
Right.
Is really what I'm gonna say. And then you also saw we have a list of other high priority needs in the district.
Yeah, this was-
That certainly compete for this. This is important. I mean, we've been in those buildings. They are hot, some of them, very hot. And it's a major concern, and we talk about it every year. So I reflect back to the board, what would the board like to do in terms of further conversation, study?
My recollection is about a year ago when we had this discussion. You provided us with a list of schools that were kind of in priority order in terms of needs for air conditioning. And I thought we had already decided we were going to attack the problem in that way until we got a huge pot of money and we could do it all at one time. Is my memory not serving me correctly, Todd?
We came forward and recommended Bill Reed, and we knew that was the priority. Besides that, it becomes a challenge is how do we say this space needs cooling, but that space doesn't. I mean, they all need cooling. We knew Bill Reed, that was the top. I mean, it was the type of building. We had other options on there similar to this year, and it was isolated in the spaces of, ESS or kindergarten.
Right.
Or, yeah.
And I do remember that Bill Reed was at the top of the list, but there were other schools that were mentioned as being particularly in need, or parts of particular schools.
Correct. Similar to this list tonight. It's just we kind of broke it out a little different tonight and just said, okay.
Yes.
Because I think Pleasant High might have been on the last time, from what I recall. So this time we said, okay, ESS and elementary is probably the higher priority.
Right.
So that's where we really focused.
And then the other thing I would say is, again, last summer, I remember Mike Hausman disseminated it, but I'm sure it probably came from your department, a list of mitigation strategies for all the schools that weren't fully air conditioned to deal with the really hot days in the face of not being able to air condition all the buildings at one time. So I would hope that that list of mitigation strategies would be disseminated again, that building administrators would be reminded that they have those. Is it as good as air conditioning? Of course not, but it did contain some really effective ways of dealing with hot buildings.
So I know that Dr. Schaefer would like us to say, hey, let's give him an answer, but I don't think we have an answer for him at this point. We have a retreat in August on the 3rd. It'll be in the midst of the hot weather, not the rainy, not the cold.
And we'll be in an air-conditioned room probably.
Well, the date that I have reserved, I haven't been able to secure it because we have to have money to put on it, but we get that back. Is August 3rd, the day after our
Study session.
new teacher orientation thing, and then, yes, or new teacher welcome back, or whatever it is. But we can use the clubhouse again as our place, and so we can easily add that to one of our conversations, that we might be able to reflect better on it when we're in the midst of hot.
I'll say even if we came to a decision, like even if the board said, yes, we want to authorize X number of dollars, we still wouldn't be able to do anything until next summer anyways to begin the installation. Like we couldn't be doing that. So even like if the board early on, let's say in the fall, made a decision that we wanted to, the timeline is okay. I guess that's what I'm trying to articulate, that whether we would want to make it sooner rather than later in the fall if we want any type of, activity going into next summer. But just so we know we're okay on timeline.
Okay,
Okay.
that helps.
Well, I think what I would appreciate, I think talking about a retreat is fine, but I also sort of feel like that just kicks the can down the road a
It does
little
kick
bit.
it down the road.
So I feel like what I would appreciate from what I'm hearing from everybody is we need a strategic plan to address this. So what could you come up with a plan or a recommendation? Like, you've given us some options, like here's the Carrie Martin and the Centennial, but I don't know, do you think that's our best next step? Or do you think the ESS is our best next step? Or like if doing the way we did Bill Reed was not a good choice, well, maybe we should have done something different. And I think looking at, well, you know, what money we have available, can we take a small amount from reserves every year combined with whatever, what do we need from a bond, you know, to add to it? I think I would very much appreciate like a more comprehensive strategic plan recommended by people who are much more knowledgeable about it than we are, to say, okay, this is blah, 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 and then we can look at that. I don't know if anybody would agree with that.
Yeah, and then I think that can give the public some, you know, well, we do have a plan, you know, it's not just, or some, you know, like a roadmap, you know, it's not gonna be like a linear, like, but, you know, like, yeah, this is what we recommend is, you know, spending this chunk of money here, and then however X amount of years later or the next year, this, and then if we ask for, you know, incorporate X amount of dollars into a bond, what could that get us? So, yeah, I'm with you on that, like more of a roadmap.
Specifically, what you said that you were gonna do for the work with MPC, I think is where I think we should live, right? So it's already part of that presentation to begin with. I think we need to start talking about it there.
Right.
And that's the group that has their eyes on this, along with your experience. I think we really need that holistic look.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would say, you know, reflecting on the conversation, that's how we tackle it. I mean, it's not, you know, fortunately it is just the larger pieces and it's sustained over years. You know, what it's gonna look like is probably an option of 3 to 4 schools every 6 to 8 years. And that's, you know, so that's, I think,
Better than nothing.
and that's what I think the next steps are, is just to show that that's
Yeah,
the
if you
next piece. So, yeah, we can definitely do that.
Todd, what would be a reasonable amount of time, like if we were to prepare, let's say, a strategic plan or roadmap to present to the board? Is that something we can have in the early fall?
We could, we have the information, you know, and it's going to be a two-way conversation too, because what we don't want to do is, I mean, there's ways to say, oh, we can solve this in 10 years, or there are ways to say we can solve this in 20 years. So I think what I'd like to recommend is come back with some different strategic options and say, here's 3 different ways we can look at this.
Maybe we do that in a working session then, so it can just be more of a conversation as opposed to one. Does that work for us?
Yeah, I think we'd want a working session. Thank you, both of you, for staying late. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
I was wondering what the score was.
82 to 70.
Same.
Nuggets.
Oh, good, okay.
Is it over?
No, fourth quarter, there's
Was it?
10 minutes left.
Okay.
82 to 70. Nuggets are winning.
All right, I've had a request to remind people that if somebody sends a date or an invitation to something, don't ignore it, respond one way or another. I can make it, I can't make it, I don't know if I can make it, but don't leave it hanging. So if somebody has set something up in our calendars, don't just ignore it. Respond to it saying, I can't make it, or somehow, just to help people be able to figure out what's really going on versus just letting it sit empty there for everybody. Yeah, and we just have to do that. As far as our retreat, I have the 3rd set for us, and I will talk as soon as Laura Lee comes back.
What time are we thinking?
Like 10 to 3 is what I put down as an option, and then we'll have lunch brought in. Oh, Stu, yes, you had a topic.
I do, and I don't have a particular meeting to suggest that we would do this, but because I'm going to go back to the birth and growth issue, because option number 2 would result in the creation of 2 elementary schools that are quite a bit larger than anything currently in the district. I think we need some time at a study session to discuss the merits of those two options, perhaps a third option. We need, I think, an opportunity to talk about the research that Todd sent to all of us as a result of an RFI that I had. I also have one more study that I shared with him that I'm going to ask Dr. Schaefer to send to the rest of the board. I think that as we move forward in solving the growth problem in Berthoud, I think it behooves us to have some serious time to talk about the various options and to discuss what the research says about optimal school size and so on. So like I said, I don't have a date, and that's why I was asking Todd, how far in advance will the items be listed? But just to put on people's radar, because I think this is a really important discussion for us to have.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other requests for
Yes.
information or anything else?
Okay. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thank you.